Good, so I'll call the meeting to order, and good morning to everybody. It's nice to see everybody here, and it is Monday, isn't it? Happy Monday, right? I bet you guys are glad this weekend stuff is over. All right, glad to be back here. Good, so how are we doing this, Mr. B? Are we, you gonna kick us off, or Mr. Sherman, or?
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Mayor, members of council. So just for the record, this meeting is not being televised directly, but will be recorded and it will be played for the public. So we had talked about in the last year that I've been here, we have talked about making some changes to a number of our codes and policies, things like that. So the Land Development Code is probably I wouldn't say it's the most important, but it's definitely one of the more important codes because it deals with people's property rights and how our community develops and is tax-based, et cetera. So Mr. Sherman and his staff have been working on this for quite some time. Actually, my first day on the job, Mr. Sherman gave me like a 10-page single-spaced memo about all the changes that he was thinking of making at that time. So we're only going to touch a little bit of those. We have 3 hours this morning. There are about 4 or 5 topics to cover. Not sure we're going to get through all of them. It depends on how much of a discussion we have. But this is likely, with the council's approval, this is likely to be one of a few of these workshops. Land development codes, as you know, they're products of a time and place. And communities will adopt a code that make all kinds of changes, and then 20 years will go by, and what you expect from the community and the way it looks will be different than what the community expected 2 decades ago. So that's kind of what we're looking at right now. There have also been some legal changes at the state that we need to address, and that's part of Mr. Sherman's discussion this morning. So what I'd like to do is invite Mr. Sherman up with your approval. He'll kick us off. And then obviously any questions you might have, just feel free. We'd like to make this a conversation if possible.
Very good. Council, does that sound good to everybody? We're good? Okay, Mr. Sherman, welcome, sir.
All right, well, good morning. I know they're kind of boring and there's a lot of words on these, but we've got some slides for our code, so when to have a dialogue and a discussion with the council. And also that way it'll allow the citizens or residents later in the future to participate a little bit better. The first one I want to do today is an overview, and I think Mr. Bahia really kicked it off well, because when you talk about land development code changes and then you look back 20 years from now and it didn't work out, or things were different than what maybe we had thought in that past 20 years, planning and land development code, it gives us a way to sort of not so much do visioning, but future literacy, become literate in our minds with scenarios of what may happen in the future. And you need it in the planning documents and you need it in our land development code. And that's one thing we tried to take into consideration as we went through this, because our code hasn't been opened up in a long time. What's the situation going to be for the town in 20 years from now? So these are the overview of the proposed minutes. And I think, personally, I'm kind of excited. Land development code changes aren't real excited, but it's something that since I've been here in the 1 year and 5 months, I saw immediately we needed some code changes. And the council saw that as well, and in their budget, this was one of our goals, was to address some concerns with our land development code and propose amendments to better serve the community. So as we did this, we're fortunate we don't have to work in isolation. And this is not the best table. I could not change the colors, so pardon me for my technologically challenged table there. But we looked at some other local governments that have a pretty good reputation, our municipalities, and then we did Hillsborough County as well. And those, we looked at, I think it was five local governments to see how they addressed some of the code changes that we were looking at in this round. And these are the amendments were proposed for the workshop. We want to talk about accessory dwelling units. We want to talk about our fences, commercial vehicle restrictions in residential areas. Those are primarily to weight restrictions that are in our code right now. Permitted signs and some definitions. We're going to have to, as we go through this, probably modify some definitions every time we sit and discuss code changes, because oftentimes there's things we need to define or add to our definition lists as we go through the code. So, and these are some of the proposed amendments, and this is an ongoing list of stuff that we think we need to take a look at in the future. And I think one that I really, substantive but also process. And I think one area, and the last one you see is we need to take a look at our site plan review process to make sure that we follow the code, we follow the vision of the council, but we also push development projects as fast as we can through the approval process to get things built. And that's it. So if y'all have any questions about the introduction, I can answer those. I would like to have kind of a dialogue as we go through things today, so anytime you want to interrupt me, please do.
Councilmember Abel.
Would you please go back to the slide that had the list of ones we're going to look at today?
Yes, ma'am.
So I had a question about the first one. I know we talked about ADUs at our budget workshop, but does that also include things like sheds? Oh, I'm getting the flashlight. Anyway, does that include sheds, or is that just for like dwelling units specifically?
Today, ma'am, we want to talk just about ADUs.
Got it.
Other side yard setbacks or structures will be further on down the list. We got some direction from our Board of Adjustment on dealing with structures in the side yard and covered structures and things, so that will be probably at the next meeting.
Thank you. Okay, that's all for now.
Other questions, council members? Okay.
Okay, so the first one I want to talk about tonight is accessory dwelling units. We've got 5 items. What I'd like to do it is, I'm going to cover ADUs and the commercial vehicle restrictions in residential areas, and then Ms. Anaya will be discussing the other 3. So, and I want to have dialogue, so anytime you want to just, break in, please do. So as the council knows, and we've actually had people come talk to us, most every community in Florida is suffering from affordable housing crisis, attainable as well as affordable. And so, and it's no different than in Dade City, or excuse me, in Temple Terrace. Dade City is the other community I worked in, and it's no different in Dade City as it is in Temple Terrace and as many communities in the state of Florida. So what we wanted to talk to you all about tonight is accessory dwelling units. And accessory dwelling units really is just that. It's an accessory or an additional dwelling unit on a single-family property. It can be attached. It can be freestanding. And that was actually one of the predominant patterns of development in urbanized communities in the United States and in the state of Florida and in Temple Terrace, actually. Oh, gosh, I'm sorry. Hit the wrong button. Okay. So what are ADUs? They're a smaller dwelling unit that's part of a single-family detached unit. They can be attached. They can be detached. And these are some types. They could be mother-in-law cottages, tiny houses, lane width, like they could be on alleyways. There's a smaller attached unit or detached on the single property. And we've all heard of them as mother-in-law suites because I think that was probably the common use of those accessory dwelling units throughout many years. But now as we get into where it's affordable housing crisis, in the state of Florida, they're also used for just rental units. And the statute actually, Chapter 163, which is the planning statute for Florida, Part 2, recognizes ADUs as an appropriate way to address affordable housing in local governments. And so detached ones could be backyard cottages, granny flats, tiny houses, garage apartments. And these are some photos that we've pulled off. Actually, they're just stock photos of accessory dwelling units. And these are other types of ADUs. Addition to principal structure, generally they're at the back, but sometimes in the side. And these are actually Lennar homes, and they're building new homes with attached mother-in-law suites right on them. So that's kind of a new model that they have, which I think is pretty neat. It fits into a lot of residential communities in our state. And we've all known people who've lived in accessory dwelling units. Actually, here's some in Temple Terrace, and these are really beautiful examples in Temple Terrace. That's an accessory dwelling unit. Here's one. The upper floor is an accessory dwelling unit attached to the primary residence. Here's some more in Temple Terrace. And who lives in them? in-laws, adult children. In this area, will definitely would have college students if they were permitted by the city. And people needing affordable housing units. Now, we've all known people who live in ADUs, and this is Fonzie. If y'all remember, Fonzie lived in the Cunningham's garage apartment. So that, I think is kind of neat. Since we all know Fonzie, we all know people who've lived in ADUs.
No, half the people in here do not know.
Well, for the old people in here, and I saw a couple of y'all smile, so y'all know who Fonzie is too.
Fonzie was cool.
Fonzie is cool. Why ADUs? Well, housing in the Tampa Bay area is, as y'all know, is really expensive. Some of the highest rents in Florida are in the Tampa Bay area. They provide more rental opportunities in an already strained rental market. They give homeowners flexibility to share independent living with family members. ADUs allow for elderly to age in place. They increase property values as that second unit, and they create opportunities to earn extra income for families. And the basis for the ADUs is, one is the Florida statutes. It's recognized in Chapter 163. But in our future land use element, we recognize ADUs as well. And there's a policy that says ADUs should be in the 2 residential future land use, single-family future land use map categories that we have. So what we've done is try and take all that into consideration and then write a draft ordinance addressing ADUs, allowing it in the accessory section of our land development code. And I wanted to go through this language with the council. I am going to read from my memo here because I'm not sure if I didn't make it large enough, but I'm not sure if I can read off the screen. So this will be a new section C in accessory dwelling units in section 12-415. We first start with the definition, and we have defined what an accessory dwelling unit is. And this is the definition, I believe, that's in our comprehensive plan for what an accessory dwelling unit is. So what that says is accessory dwelling units mean an ancillary or secondary living unit that has a separate kitchen, bathroom, sleeping area existing either within the same structure or on the same lot as the primary dwelling unit. So that's our definition of an accessory dwelling unit. It's pretty standard. We're proposing that they're going to be allowed in all single-family residential zoning districts, not in the multifamily districts. We are recommending that the principal dwelling unit, the people who own that principal dwelling unit can't rent that one out. So if you have an accessory dwelling unit, the main house, the primary structure has to be owner occupied. Obviously, any of these can change at the direction of the council, but we felt that would make, and keep property values to where the whole property isn't rental. It just makes sure that the primary structure and the owners being able to oversee what's going on that property. The size of the accessory dwelling unit is something we discussed back and forth. They go anywhere from a percentage in Florida of the principal structure or to just a flat square foot. We felt like it was important to put a minimum and a maximum square footage in there. So our minimum square footage that we are suggesting at this time is 300 square feet, and the maximum is 800 square feet. Whatever we pick, it should be clearly subordinate to the principal structure on the property. And based on what we saw in the city of Temple Terrace, we felt it was with at least in that range of sizes. We wanted to limit the number. As doing a research, limit it to 1 accessory dwelling unit for each property. As I did my research on accessory dwelling units, I found that in some areas there were multiple units allowed in Florida. And in California, I found that in some areas they allowed up to 8 accessory dwelling units on properties. We are not recommending anything like that. Also, we wanted to make sure that there's adequate off-street parking on a hardened surface for each accessory dwelling unit, so people aren't parking in yards or parking on the streets. The density, and this is one thing that the statute envisions, is that the density for the dwelling unit should be density neutral. Because as the council knows, our our future land use map categories set intensity and density and types of uses on each property. So if we allow 4 units per acre or whatever the density for that particular future land use map category, this wouldn't come into play. So it's going to be density neutral as a statute and how most local governments, in fact, all local governments that we did research on, they all view it that way. So there won't be any issues with the local governments violating their comprehensive plan as it comes to residential density. Then there's the utility connections. This is one thing I spoke with our utilities department, and they're recommending that there's 1 utility connection and 1 electrical connection and meter to each property. So the ADU's power would be generated through the meter, and the primary unit would pay that fee or that charge. We're not going to allow accessory dwelling units to be cut off and resold. So it would have to stay as a principal dwelling unit. We'll allow rental units to non-family members because there's such a need, I'm recommending, but then if you're not a family member, you're going to have to register with our the residential rental program, as we do with all rental units in the city. We're recommending that no home occupations would be allowed from the ADUs. So this is one too. We're hoping that new ADUs that are constructed on the property fit in architecturally with the principal structure. We had some discussion in our department whether we felt we could do that or not. Would we be adopting a local code by doing this? And in talking with Mr. Foss, he felt like the building code allowed us to do this without having to change any local building restrictions or codes. And I think that's it for right now. As I developed this one, I tried to do something that was relatively simple, easy to implement, easy to follow, and easy to regulate. Some local governments, Hillsborough County, I believe it was Hillsborough, maybe it was Tampa, had a bunch of matrices and where they would be allowed. And I just felt like with a smaller local government with us, like us, we don't have a huge staff. So whatever we adopt, it's got to be implementable. We've got to be able to track it. And I think we've come up with a system that would allow us to do that. So I'm available for any questions that the council or the manager or the attorney or anybody may have.
We'll start down here. Councilmember Abel.
My first question is, I think in the backup documents, you said that some zoning districts in the city already have ADUs in the code for them. Which ones have?
So in the future land use element, we allow ADUs. Nowhere in the code that I'm aware of allows for accessory dwelling units.
Okay, maybe I misunderstood that part then. Thank you. And next one is about for item 10. Could you go back to item 10 for me, please, so I can see?
ADUs is rental properties, that one?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am, I will.
Oh, yeah, to non-family members. So I had a question, actually, it's peripheral to this, about the residential rental program. I know that you have to register if you have a rental in your home, but I was wondering, is that consistent with what other communities do that you know of?
In all honesty, I'm not aware. I do know that we require rental units to be registered, and that's why we put it in there. I
Okay.
spoke with folks in that program, and they felt like it would be a good insert in this code as well, to be consistent with what we already do.
Okay, thank you. And my next question is about number 11, about home occupations. So does that mean that it would not be allowed to have like your own studio or workshop in your ADU?
Yes, that's correct. That's the way we have it written now.
Okay. When is the right time to opine about these things?
Right now.
Okay. Personally, I think it should be able to be used for someone who lives in the principal residence as a place for like a studio or something. But I don't really know what types of requirements we might have to list in there to make that all worked out. It just seems like, it's on their property. They should be able to use it for something that's within, some parameters.
So were you talking about, ma'am, about the ADU being used as a home home occupation for the people who live in the principal structure?
Yes.
Okay. The way we wrote this is the people who live in that ADU can't use that as, for a home occupation. That was the intent of this language here.
Oh, the people who live in the ADU can't
Yes,
use that
ma'am.
for their place of employment?
Yes, ma'am. So we allow home occupations, however, I believe it addresses it primarily just to the principal structure where it's allowed.
So if they're a seamstress, they couldn't have their sewing machine set up in there?
I mean, you can have like a she shed or a man cave in a shed or something like that, provided you meet all the bulk and yard regulations and lot coverage requirements and height and things like that. But right now, it doesn't allow a living unit. But, I mean, I guess, but that would be another code. We would need to open up and look at the home occupation section to see if we want to allow accessory units or to be used for home occupations.
I think I need to put a little more thought into that. I'm not exactly sure I understand the whole of that premise. And also, could you go back to number 3?
I can. Yes, ma'am.
I wrote a note, but I don't know what I was talking about. Owner occupancy. Oh, yeah, that was the one about the owner of the property needs to live in the main house and not in the ADU.
Yes, ma'am.
I think a lot of times, though, you know, people might be aging and they might want a smaller unit and see that the primary home is a better residence for families and such. So I kind of like the idea, as long as the property owner is on site, the ADU could be used for either way. It doesn't really matter where they live, but that's just my opinion.
I had a question on that too, and go ahead, Vice Mayor.
Well, I was going to say, I thought the intent was meaning that a third party, a company or somebody that owns the property as a rental unit, the main house, couldn't also rent out the accessory structure. Is that the intent of what you were talking about, or not?
When we put this together, and as far as I'm aware, for most local governments, they will be a principal structure, a single-family detached residential unit who's owned by a resident of Temple Terrace, and they have an accessory dwelling unit on that property, either detached or attached. And they rent that unit, or they have a family member in it. And that's the way that I wrote it right now.
Okay, so,
It could be,
well, I mean, back to your question. So the property owner could live in the accessory dwelling unit. They own the property.
Not under the draft that we've.
not under the draft we're looking at. The council member's correct. And I have no issue. It's done that way in other units. That's just not the approach that I took when I drafted this one. But there is utility and value in doing it that way.
Okay.
So,
That's a good
I
clarification.
had the same questions that Councilmember Abel did, and I'm asking, I'm not necessarily proposing. In my mind, I'm trying to figure out the downside to this, but I can envision a scenario, in fact, it's not hypothetical. I know of several times when this has actually happened, so it's not, these are people that I know. Scenario is, I have a big, beautiful home, and I have a garage apartment out back, and you know, it's just my wife and I now, and we're getting old, and we're getting tired of cleaning this big house. There's rooms we haven't been in 3 years. And so we want to move into the garage apartment and rent the house, because I can rent the house out for a lot more money than I can rent that little garage apartment, and we don't need it. Is there a downside to this that I'm not seeing where the owner's still on property? I wouldn't support any version of this where the owner's not got to be there. I think that's important. I wouldn't support it any other way. But is there a downside if the owner's in the ADU instead of the main structure? That's what I'm trying to figure out. I mean, they're still accessible to code enforcement, they're still accessible to the police if there's a problem with the tenant, illegal parking. I mean, it's not like they're moving to Minnesota or something, they're still there.
I see no downside to that if it's clearly written that way.
Tom, you see,
I hear what you're saying on this.
you about to come up here.
Sir, I would just be a little concerned about rental properties at the LLCs where, but I don't see a problem with a homesteaded property where the property owner is somewhere on site. I don't see a problem with that.
That's what we're contemplating.
Yeah, yeah.
The owner would still have to be there.
Right, that's correct. My concern would be, what I hear so far is parking issues. When you have, more people living on the property, it creates more of a parking issue, whether it be the street or in the driveway.
City manager?
So it's just checking with the city attorney. One question that just came to mind is whether the homestead exemption would still apply if the owner leaves the principal residence and now is living in the ADU. And the attorney just mentioned that might be a question we have to follow up with the county and the property appraiser to get clarification on that.
Yeah, I
because that's
don't know
one-
the answer to that either.
I never thought of that.
I do think, okay, let me see if the council agrees to this, because I don't know that if we do. I think what I'm hearing Councilmember Abel say, and I know what I'd like to say is, on that particular bullet, I'd like to see if we can get some further answers to that. And if it's impossible because of the homestead exemption rules or something like that, then that's fine, but that can be brought back to us. But I still have some questions about whether that's necessary to have that.
I think what would happen is, well, it factors in on your taxes as well, because, if you're using part of your home as an office, you can deduct that part on your taxes, but you can't deduct the part of the rest of the house. The question on the homestead, it's really going to be a problem, and it may not be a problem, but it'll be an issue for the homeowner. It wouldn't be an issue for us.
Right,
I mean,
that's kind of what I'm
yeah, it
thinking is,
doesn't matter to us whether they have homestead or they don't have homestead, as long, the issue for us is that the owner be on the property.
that's what I was getting at, and that, we could mandate that in, right, their homestead exemption, that's really their problem. We don't have a dog in that fight, that's not up to us to be worried about that, is it? Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
Councilmember.
Oh, I just had a question about what if they're only there like partially, like they're snowbirds or something? Does that factor in at all?
For homestead, yes, you have to be there, 51%, I think, of the time has to be there. I mean, if they're snowbirds now and they're spending more of their time in North Carolina than they are in Florida, they shouldn't be having homestead here. But
Okay.
it's up to the property appraiser's office to catch that, so.
And we would need to be concerned about that in our code somehow. So, yeah, it's owner occupied, but you have to be there a certain amount of time. You can't say, well, I live in the garage. I've been there 9 months because I'm in Park City, but we'd have to think about that. Yes.
So I think when Mr. Sherman showed one of his first slides was we're going to use the homestead exemption as sort of an easy way to verify if in fact the owner is living on the premises. Now, if we don't rely on the homestead exemption, it's more complicated for us to figure that out. It's just, you'd have to find a different way to do that, and it's not going to be easy probably.
I mean, we
In
could-
most instances, people, I think, will be honest and be simple, but there could be some complicated things where now we have to guess, is that truly the owner, is it not the owner? So that's just where it gets a little bit tricky.
Gotcha. Yes, Councilmember.
I've got a couple of things.
Well, let's exhaust this one because I think we all have other things too. Do you want,
Yeah, I mean, about this one.
Okay.
Do we have any idea how many houses are not homesteaded? Do we track that, or can we track that, or?
Yes, sir, we could probably get that number. I have no idea how many are not homesteaded, but we could try and find that out.
Because once we have a piece of property bought by a corporation, then it wouldn't be able to have an ADU. And that would have to be some kind of a restriction on it. That's my only concern with that. And the home occupation deal, I have two nephews who both work. They travel all over the world, and they set up in a VRBO type scenario. One was for like 8 months, and they work from there. So they wouldn't be able to do that under this scenario?
Under this scenario, yep. I felt like at least on the front end, I want to be, if we get, this isn't the right way to put it, but to protect our neighborhoods, because one thing our comp plan does call for is protecting our residential areas, is if we had to be a little more regulatory on the front end and then maybe relax it some on the back end. But that's why I put in the home occupation thing. I see there are people now that work at a computer and they never leave their house, you know. Maybe we don't need to have that as a requirement, but that was my first cut. And mostly it's just
I just don't know how we enforce it.
well, you have to have a BTR if you get a home occupation from
What?
business tax
Oh, okay,
receipt.
I'm sorry. I didn't hear the.
Yes, sir, I'm sorry.
Letters, okay. And the other, then touched on what Mayor, I think somebody already brought this up, so the parking issue.
Mm-hmm.
It requires off-street, hard-based, define hard-based. Shell or?
Not in the dirt.
Huh?
I mean, the first thought is I just didn't want dirt parking or parking in the grass. So, you know, leave that open to, could be gravel, I guess. It could be asphalt. It could be concrete. It could be pavers, but not natural grass or dirt.
That would have to come up, you'd have to have a pathway.
They would need to provide a site plan for us when they do this. So we would be able to check as one of the requirements that there's a hard parking surface.
I'm good.
Just can I get to home occupation? So, Mr. Sherman, currently, don't we have limitations on home occupations as it is? So you can't, I don't think that you can have a home occupation where there are multiple people coming to your house all the time,
Right.
right? It's typically something like somebody was saying before, working on your computer all day. Maybe you have some business where maybe one person comes. Is there a limitation already in our home occupation code?
So I believe it's like traffic can't be generated in any greater volumes than would be associated with a single-family home.
Okay, so based upon that, and hearing some of the council's concern, do you still have the same trepidation, I guess, about allowing it for ADUs if we?
I'm not, either way is fine with me. I just wanted it at first on the front end to be a little more strict and then get direction from the council. This was, and we'll do whatever you want. There is merit in doing that. As long as you follow the other requirements, you get a home occupation license from the city. You're not storing things outside. You don't have signage. You don't have people coming up. There's no noise or lighting or anything emitted from the property. Then, yeah, it would be fine, I guess.
Thank you.
I hear what you're saying about this. I think we'd be good, at least at the beginning, it seems to me, to leave that provision in there. Because innocent enough sounding, if somebody's they work from home, they're remote or whatever, and they work for some state farm or whatever, and they're sitting there at their computer all day long, like a lot of people, that's how they work now. Nobody's gonna know that. Nobody's gonna be, Tom's not gonna be going on there peeking in the window to see if he can catch you making money on eBay or something. I mean, but when we crack this door open, businesses that sound innocent and innocuous enough, even though that's our intent, like art studios and stuff, and we're all in our mind, we're picturing, hey, this is some artist that lives in a loft apartment and wants to set up an easel and have people, paint portraits or whatever. That all sounds, ideally. But that's also open the door to stuff that we can't envision. And the next thing you know, you have supplies stacked up outside. You've got people coming in and out all the time. You've got traffic is increased because of and then they go downstairs into the garage and now they've got that maybe they're doing different kinds of art and they're running band saws all day long and all night long, right? I mean, the unintended consequences become almost impossible to regulate. Then you get into, well, you can do it, but you can't do it after 7 o'clock, or you can't do this kind of business. It just becomes this octopus of things that it's untenable to try to regulate. My opinion is it would be wise of us to take a cautious approach to this at first and just leave this prohibition in there. If somebody's doing online sales of Avon or something, I just, how many of those cases do you really see coming before the code board as it is? So I just think that, but
That makes a lot of sense to me, and I think probably being a little tighter on that in the beginning is important. But my question would be, is if somebody sees that regulation and they want to use it for something like an art studio or something, is there a board that they could come to and they could ask for some sort of special permission to do that? Do we have a mechanism in place for that? No?
not if the code's written the way that it's being proposed.
And not the way the home occupation's written either
City
in the
Attorney?
code.
As we all might remember, that the Florida legislature already implemented a statute that allows for home-based business. So we've already, there's nothing we can do about home-based business in the main house. Actually, renting out a room is a business in itself. That's why they'd need to register with their rental housing program. So they're already operating one business merely by renting out the smaller space. So if they were operating their own business in the house and they're renting, you've already got now two businesses going on in the house. However, before the statute changed, some communities did allow for home-based occupations, and St. Petersburg did that for years. You would go to the city, you'd fill out the form, and the staff would look at what you wanted to do. Law offices were a big thing. If some attorney wanted to operate their office out of the house, they would look at, what street were they on? Is it a quiet street? Is it a busy street? And would consider what kind of traffic it would generate, what kind of noise it would generate, and you could get an approval from staff to operate your office in your house or whatever else you were asking to do in your house. Sometimes they would say no because it was going to generate probably too much traffic and deliveries and things like that. And there was an appeal process, but usually if staff said no, this is not suitable for the area, that would usually be the end of it. But so you could do that. So.
Thank you.
Councilmember Schisler?
Yeah, I would like to see it rewritten, the occupational use of the ADU to where it refers back to the overall city occupational rules for at-home businesses. And then that way, rather than just say, no, we can't do it, well, to your point, we're already doing it by renting it out. And I think that if then we could focus more on that other ordinance or other code section and better define what businesses we can put in there that would be allowed in there. And did the state prohibit regulation or just modify?
The state pretty much prohibited any regulation of home-based business other than your usual codes. If it was too noisy, if it was, you're parking on the streets or in the grass, they'd have to comply with everything that a residence would have to comply with, but we could not say no to a home occupation.
But the only point I'm trying to say is that with the ADUs, you refer back to the overall city occupational rules, as opposed to having a set of rules here and a set of rules there. Make it simple. You revert to the cities. Nobody's going to put a car, auto repair shop there. You're not going to put a beauty shop in there or anything of that nature.
Why not?
Huh? Well, if our regular code, our normal code of addressing that is restrictive that you couldn't do it, then that would apply to the ADU also. Instead of having two sets of rules, one for the main structure and then one for the ADU. Just refer back to the overall city code. That just makes it easier in my mind.
Clarify for me what you said. I know you wanted to say, but I just wanted, before I lose this, I wanted to see if I'm understanding this correctly. So does the state preemption of this, in your opinion, does this apply to the proposed ADUs also?
I don't know. As I said, just renting out the ADU, that itself is a business. You would kind of hope that the owner renting it out would probably put in their lease, you can't run a business out of here because now they're opening themselves up to a bunch of noise or whatever. But say you've got a garage apartment. I mean, you could be building boats in the garage and living up above the garage. You would have the bandsaws going all day.
And what's wrong with that?
And, and, you know, that was one of the, that was one of the scenarios in the cabinet building and things like that, that, you know, people were bringing up at the time that the Florida League of Cities was objecting to the home-based business.
But my point to that was if that preemption applies to ADUs as well, then all this conversation is for not, we're wasting our
It
time.
might, yeah.
Okay. Meredith and then
No, go ahead and go to him.
Vice Mayor?
So we're trying to come up with something, but right now, what we're talking about, if you have an owner in the main house and they have an accessory structure, you could run a business out of that.
Not under the current proposed draft.
No, it's not occupied. You have
Oh,
a
no,
girl,
if it was not occupied and you just had an ADU.
you had an ADU and you can run your business out of the ADU.
Yes,
You can have your family member live there and run a business out of it because it's not a rental property.
right.
But as soon as you rent it, then you can't. That's why I said we're trying to, it's having a hard time coming up with something to figure out every
I think
scenario.
the statute might have limited number of employees, that they had to be, you know, family members, and you could only have a certain number of people who weren't family members working
Okay,
at the home-based business. So,
The way I wrote it now, all home occupations, whether it's mine as the homeowner or I rent to somebody and they have an home occupation, would be prohibited in the accessory dwelling units.
but we have that now. We have people running businesses and home offices in their detached garages. So they become illegal?
Well, there are, if they don't meet the HO home occupation rules, then right now, and I can't regurgitate them all to you, but I think they would be illegal. Generally, the home occupation needs to be within the principal structure. I believe it's no more than 25% of the home. You can't store things on site, you can't have signage, you can't have traffic generated in any greater volumes normally associated with a single-family home. I believe that's what our regulations say. That's the standard pretty much in all local governments. So.
Right now, you could operate a business out of your detached garage.
yes, but you're usually not living there, too.
I know, but I'm just saying right now. So if nothing changes other than this new rule, that what's been okay is not okay anymore.
If you turn it into a dwelling,
An ADU,
it would be, yes.
Okay, and an ADU has to have the kitchenette and all the other things.
full, yes, house, have the bathrooms, kitchen, and an area for sleeping.
Okay, and I have another question about that. Okay, so I know of it, there's been a couple projects, but I know firsthand on one project where the person was building a detached garage with an upstairs office, and it's still under construction, but took a long time in permitting because our permitting process made sure that it did not have the ability to turn into an accessory dwelling unit, so it didn't have plumbing for kitchens. It was, really worked hard. Now, that's gonna be okay in a year or so whenever this passes. Are we gonna be able to do anything to go back and help that homeowner with reduced permitting or something? Because we worked at him really hard so he wouldn't, or they. And I know we have a few other projects that just completed like that.
That homeowner met the code, and that's our job to make sure that they meet the code at the time they do something. I mean, we can reach out to the guy or the lady or
It's okay,
whoever.
I'm just saying that's happened. I know anytime you change something, that's gonna happen.
We have that, we've done it with a number of properties, worked with them to make sure that at least till the code changes, they have not,
Yep,
we've not
okay.
permitted an accessory dwelling unit.
Okay, so I have a couple of questions. What about RVs, mobile homes, campers, that kind of stuff?
You know, I had something in here at one point, and I don't see it right now, Mr. Mayor, that said RVs, mobile homes, things like that shall not be used for accessory dwelling units, campers.
I-
And it may have been taken out, or I'm not seeing it.
Okay, that needs to be addressed
Yep.
in some fashion, and whether they are or not, or under what conditions, or that, because that's the easiest and most likely way I mean, people can go down and buy a trailer, put in electric and some hookups, and voila.
Yes, sir, that's not the intent, and I'll make sure the next draft that comes back clearly states that's not permitted.
Okay, unless the council wants to permit that, I don't know. But whatever, that needs to be figured out, because that's gonna be that's the easiest way to get an ADU.
Yeah.
Too many acronyms.
Maybe you could put that under item 12, other standards, requiring a foundation and,
Yeah.
that type of verbiage.
Well, we have to be very careful, because we have another code that prohibits mobile homes. So this would be,
Yeah,
Just-
we don't allow mobile homes at all
Right.
in this city.
Right.
We actually had to deal with a guy who had a vacant lot and just drove in a mobile home and bunch of goats too, and decided he was going to live
Yeah,
there.
yeah, so-
So that took a while to get him out.
but this would really open a Pandora's box if we start letting people live in RVs in the backyard, because it conflicts with other sections of our code that prohibit mobile homes.
I know of no local government that allows an RV or a mobile home to be used as an ADU.
Okay. I think we probably ought to stipulate to put that in there, so that we know that it's prohibited over here in another section of the code, but if somebody's just looking up ADUs to see what they can do, it doesn't say anything about it. So, the utilities, I had a question about that. And I know you and I had talked about the utilities in the past, about what's the best way to go. Here's my question, and really there's a couple sides to this. Depending on the property and the homeowner's unique situation, the way this is written may be a burden either way. For instance, what if you have an existing garage that has an apartment upstairs, and I don't know, maybe this doesn't exist anywhere, but what if you have this garage and it was built sometime after the home was built, and it has a separate electric meter on it already? Or water meter, I think it's probably, electric might be more likely, but suppose that it already has a separate meter. The way this draft is written, they would have to rewire that to put it onto the house electric meter. I'm not sure I see any reason why that would be required. And the other scenario would be, suppose that you're gonna build a new whatever. I believe it would probably be easier to do that with its own electric service if it's new construction, as opposed to tapping it into, because your panel in your house might not be big enough to support this new, now you've got to rewire your whole house to add a bigger panel instead of just adding, I'm just wondering, is that,
Can somebody from utilities answer? I mean, I don't know if it was Troy's folks or in billing this. I mean, it's been a while, but one of them told me 1 meter, Mike, is what we prefer, so that's why it's in here.
May I just
yeah.
So, my former community, we had this discussion, and one of the things that there was a concern about, I'm not going to speak to the electric part because we don't control that, but I can speak to the water and sewer at least, is that once you split it off, then there is more likelihood in the future of it becoming a separate property altogether, and people moving to that, and either in practice, where then the owner starts to, hey, I'm not going to be there, or I'm going to separate this out, and now it becomes more of an independent property altogether. And so that was part of the concern going on with that. I'll tell you, there's also the flip side of that, which is that if you do allow this sort of piggyback service through the main house, that the opposite can happen, which is down the road, and that could be many years down the road, the property could be parceled off. And then next thing you know, you got this house in the front that's serving the house, the water's running through the house in the front to get to the house in the back. And that creates other issues because now it's a separate property. So this is always tricky. I think Troy might have some insight as to meters, because I know typically we try to keep 1 meter per property. Obviously, there could be an irrigation meter, but trying to avoid multiple meters. Troy, do you want to come up and talk to that?
You know, speaking to that, I see the plus and minus for both. I think you could have a separate meter if you had a separate individual dwelling unit that you were looking to rent. To make it a little more cut and dry for the owner or the renter. You could also certainly tie it into the existing system. I think, kind of speaking to what you had, Andy, regarding the electrical service, holds true for the water service as well. Now you're going to have to connect into the home, run an additional line to the additional unit, dwelling unit. So I think you could probably do it either way, but I don't know if we want to restrict that to just one, to have one water meter for both the dwelling unit and the primary structure. I could see that there would be a positive for having 2 separate meters.
May I, Mr.?
Yeah, sure.
One thing that we haven't covered here, and it's actually a question I have for anyone of the department directors here, is how will the ADUs be addressed? In terms of
Yeah,
physical
that's-
mailing address, because typically we try to keep 1 meter per address. In this case now, unless it has a different address, which I'm not sure how that would work, and that comes through engineering, right?
Yes, so you would have to have a separate address to have a separate meter.
And I'm assuming they wouldn't have a separate address.
I don't know. I mean, if you rent it to, I could see if I lived with my mom or she lived there, all the mail comes to my house, I give it to her. But if I rented it to somebody else, I wouldn't want to be getting their mail. They would want to address, I imagine.
So whatever it is, I don't know how that works.
I've seen it where they actually say like 8506 and a half.
Yeah.
So that's something we're gonna have to take a look at. I'm glad it came up at this point, because we're gonna have to, our 911 system,
Yeah.
it's gonna have to correspond to that.
Go through the county's addressing.
Exactly, there's an addressing protocol that we have to look into, so it's something we're gonna have to follow up on.
I mean, they have ADUs in Hillsborough and in Tampa right now, so it's been addressed, for lack of a better term.
Okay, so that's a,
That's pretty good.
okay, so that's a question. But I still think, and the water to me, I don't know, maybe I'm not as hung up on the water being part of the main structure. Okay, I don't think to me, that's not that big a deal. But the electric, first of all, if it already exists with a separate meter, and the way this is crafted, they'd have to change that, which is expensive. I mean, that's a big undertaking, and I don't know why we would require them to do that if it already exists with a separate meter. And 2, if it's new construction and they're gonna build something, they might, like I said, they're gonna have to upgrade the panel in the house, which I know, I just did that. It cost me like $7,000 to put a new panel in my house just to go to 200 amp service or whatever, when they could just run the meter to the ADU. And so,
I think TECO would also require a separate address. We've had issues with electrical services associated with the 5G network, and they were actually issuing telephone poles addresses because it had to have its own meter system on it for electrical. So I think you're going to run into that same issue. Even if we don't require that, the electrical company is going to require that it have an additional address, because they won't put a meter unless there's an address that they can bill it to.
okay, so, thank you, Troy. Okay, council, let me see if I can sum this up and we're all in the same spot. All right, and tell me if we're not. I think been keeping track of this. So I think we're, in general, favorable to this idea with a couple of outstanding questions here. Outstanding questions, we'd like is a little more information on pondering the idea of whether the homeowner has to live in the main structure or whether they could live in the ADU, whether there's a way to make that practical or, right, maybe a little more information on that. I think we resolved the parking issue. We talked about maybe getting with city attorney and trying to cipher out this idea of home-based occupations or businesses in the ADUs, whether that's preempted, in which case we don't even need to talk about it. You know, if it's preempted by state law, we don't even need to be talking about it. If it's not, is it already adequately addressed in our other codes? And like the vice mayor said, are we going to inadvertently hamper some things that people can do now and they can't? So maybe take a little deeper dive into that. And the idea of the split utilities, is there a way to accomplish what we're trying to accomplish without causing undue burden of people having to replace stuff that's already working and operable just to comply with a single meter? And how the properties will be addressed. Those are it, I think. A little more information on those areas, is that?
That's good, very good.
But
I did read throughout a lot of stuff I read and said it one way or another, is that ADUs are not cheap to build. So there will be some expenses associated with meters and electric and plumbing and all that, you know, so.
And if the purpose that we're trying to accomplish is important enough to compel that, then so be it. But if it's not a compelling government interest, why do we need to put a $10,000 hurdle in front of somebody just to get the same electricity they already have today? So if there's a reason for it, then so be it. But, okay.
I have an academic question regarding that. So I come in, I want to put an ADU in my backyard. How does the tax assessor know that I've done that? Do we notify them or?
Well, we give them we give them reports every month on building permits
Okay,
that are
that's good.
approved, so they would factor that into when they do their evaluations.
Good. Okay, I was just curious about that.
And one thing I do want to say is, all this regulation is to make sure that we protect property values. And my example is when I moved to Dade City from Tallahassee, my wife stayed in Tallahassee and I lived in like a third world shack as an ADU on somebody's property. It built with no permits or nothing. It was fun and beautiful, but it's not something I would want to see here in Temple Terrace. And all the regulations we're doing, I think, protect property values and allow for an accessory dwelling unit.
We comfortable?
Good.
Everybody's comfortable? City manager, we are in the right spot? Good? Okay.
Thank you, I
Next,
appreciate that.
what's next here? Commercial vehicles? Are you doing that or?
Yes, sir, I'll do this one. Mr. Baroni and I spoke about this, maybe much as far back as a year ago. So we wanted to include this one in our first round. The city manager sent out a memo, I believe, as part of his updates, and one of the things he commented was that some of these are, the basis for doing this was for code enforcement issues. And this is one that has been a code enforcement issue that I don't know that if we've been enforcing it because it's so, well, it doesn't meet the standard of, let me show you what I mean by this. So to pull that one up, that would be. So this one is section 12-922, commercial vehicle restrictions in residential areas. And this is the language that we have right now. So we allow it with, according to these standards. It's a temporary basis, is providing other services to residential areas. And C number 3, it says in weight excess exceeds a weight of 1 ton. That's the rub right now with this code, because that's what 1 ton equals nowadays, basically.
Mayor, sorry.
Yes, I'm sorry. Question.
Weight class of 1 ton, I believe, is you have a 1-ton truck, a 3/4 ton truck, a 1/2-ton truck. That's weight class, not the weight of the
Not the
vehicle.
actual weight. Thank you. So this is what we want to move towards, something that's more like that. which is more what I thought was in the code. Now, I may be way off on this one, so I
That's
appreciate
either a
that.
half-ton or a three-quarter-ton truck.
Okay. This would qualify. The way I understood the code, that's what we were getting.
Go back, do you have the code language
I do.
on the slide?
Yeah.
Okay.
Number 3.
A one-ton truck's a big truck.
Said
Okay.
commercial vehicle or combination of vehicle and trailer does not exceed a weight class.
Class.
And a
1 ton.
one-ton
That
truck
doesn't
is
get-
usually.
So what would-
Yeah, that's right. A 1 ton is a 350.
Box trucks?
Yeah, that would be a one.
Well, I
Right,
mean, you can put a weight in there because a one-ton truck is typically 8,000 pounds, something like that. But it's not that isn't, if I read that, which I did, a one-ton truck is a big dually or something.
Are utility trucks? Yes. They're three-quarter or one?
We actually have quite a variety. Most of our staff utility trucks are F-250s, so that's a 3/4 ton. So an F-350 would be a 1 ton, an F-450, 550. So we have generally F-250s or F-550s. So the F-550 is the big dually box truck, or truck that has the boxes on the back, like a utility box. Those are a ton and a half.
Right. But to the Vice Mayor's point, it's not the
Yeah.
weight of the
Right.
vehicle.
It's,
the
yeah, it's the
class of the vehicle.
the capacity of the vehicle, right. So you'd be up to a 350. That's a 1-ton vehicle. F3, just as a, or 3,500 for a Chevy.
So the question on this one, before we get into it too much, is do we want to keep it as a weight class because, or the recommended 10,000 pounds? Whichever's, I don't know how you would want to enforce it. That's, I mean, not asking you, that's a statement on that. I mean, if we've been enforcing a one-ton truck at 2,000 pounds, then yeah, there's none of those exist. A Miata, maybe.
Did you have anything to say on this, or?
Maybe this will help. Give us an idea of the problem we're trying to solve.
I'm just looking for clarification for the weight of 1 ton is 2,000 pounds. It's just, I mean, so we just use more of what makes a commercial vehicle. So it's usually a box truck, or we go by the tag of the vehicle. We could run the tag of the vehicle, but when it says 1 ton, the residents call us and say, my vehicle doesn't weigh, 1 ton. So I'm just looking for a little clearance as far as the
Our
code.
current ordinance is 1-ton class, which
Right.
is not the weight of the vehicle. It's the size of the vehicle or carrying capacity.
Yeah,
That's an F-350
right.
That's a
or
big
a,
truck.
or a GM or Chevy 3500, same equivalent.
It says the Chevy Silverado GMC Sierra 3500 is a 1 ton.
Right.
A Ford F-350 is a 1 ton, and a Ram 3500 is a 1 ton.
Right.
So if it gives you any idea.
And the F-250 is a 3/4 ton, and the 2500 Chevy is because I have a 3/4 ton truck in the parking lot right now.
Okay.
And yours has a half ton.
the half ton.
F-150 is a half ton. It's not the weight of the vehicle, it's the weight class.
So then, I need to apologize for misunderstanding this weight class versus weights. And what I'd like to do is come back, revise this one, see if there's really a problem with the 1 ton weight class. And if so, do we need to change that, or do we want to do it a direct weight?
Yeah.
And I will be back in touch next
You
meeting.
don't need to apologize. We're trying to
No,
fix a
you don't-
problem
right.
and
I understand.
But, that's quite all right. So we're just trying to get an idea. We want to work with you. I mean, if there's a problem in enforcement and we're having troubles, we'll work through it. We'll figure it
Because
out.
later, it talks about the combined weight of a truck and a trailer. So now, the current ordinance doesn't talk about a trailer, I don't think, the weight of the truck and the trailer. So
It gets
you
a
may
little
want,
tricky when you start doing weights, like
right, so you might want to look at that a lot more.
Right.
I will, and there's one other thing, could you pull that?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't want to stop it. I just wanted to
No, I-
clarify that the
I
old
think it's really
ordinance.
valid, and it's difficult for us to make a regulatory recommendation unless I understand the issue. Now I understand the issue.
So these that you have, we definitely want to ban those from the city.
Right, yeah. Yes, sir, so here's one thing
Not the old air-cooled ones.
here's one thing I do want to address when we get back, and
Yes, they want.
number 4, said vehicles parked with a fully enclosed structure, and so it allows it if it's in a fully enclosed structure approved by the council with given notification given to the residents and one public hearing is held. Nowhere in the code did I find what advertisement requirements were required or what the public hearing is. Is it a resolution? Is it an ordinance? Is it just a motion? I wasn't able to find any old cases where this was done, so I'd like to revise that section as well when we bring that back to y'all to either take it out and just have a standard that you meet, or if there's a hearing, give us some direction on what those standards are for the hearing and what we need to do to get it to the council.
What would that be like, a pole barn type scenario? I mean, if you 3.25 ton above would not fit in my garage.
It's
So,
fully enclosed, so it's
Yeah,
on a
but
full-
That's what I mean,
What
there's
would it
not
be?
much guidance in this section here, what
Yeah.
that even means.
What, another question though that I did not read in this draft, that if you're gonna come back, we're gonna have discussion, I know we're gonna have discussion on this, and I don't know if this is something you wanna change, retain, but there's, as long as I've been on council and on the code board before, so we're going on 13, 14 years, there's always been this question of not so much size capacity, but what constitutes a prohibited commercial vehicle, right? If I got all over town, I might have a small car, but it's my business, so it's got a wrap on it. And, if I'm a real estate agent and it's a wrapped, or I drive a cab on the side, and so I have a yellow cab parked in my driveway, or I have a Pepsi truck parked in my driveway, or I have what's the story on that? Because we get complaints, and then, well, it's, that's really not the intent of the ordinance, and well, I mean, it seems problematic to me that we tell people they can't bring their company car home. It's a Chevy Impala, it just happens to have a commercial marking on it.
My concern, and it may not be warranted, but is when you start regulating content on signs and things, you start getting into First Amendment issues, and we have to be really careful on that.
Well, it wasn't so much the content, it was the fact that it had stuff to begin with.
Writing.
Right.
It's usually, if, some communities say, you can even have a small truck, not a box truck, but, you put a magnetic sign on it. Then you can remove it when you come home. That was a solution for some people. But it's usually, the writing on the side usually made something commercial.
Yeah, but we're a city, we're not an HOA. I mean, if somebody gets
This is the way St. Pete operated for years. You couldn't, so.
somebody gets a job and they get a take-home vehicle, it can even be a problem for them to refuse that, depending on the nature of their duties. They may be subject to getting called at 3:00 in the morning, and they need their vehicle to go to work.
And St. Pete has told people you need to find a place to park it nearby that's
Yeah.
allowable. Somebody wanted to park a giant delivery truck in the front of his house that said Cheetos, the cheese that goes crunch, on the side of the great big truck.
Right. Well, we need to
And
figure out a
so
way,
he went to the Board of Adjustment and they said absolutely not. So,
we need to figure out a way to reach a reasonable, unless we already have it. But I personally, and I can't speak for the council, but for me, I mean, if somebody has a job and they have a reasonably sized vehicle, I'm not talking about a, F-550, they work for the city of Tampa Water or something, they're bringing this huge truck home, but, we have to make some accommodations for this, in my opinion.
I don't disagree with that premise either, because, as you said, a lot of businesses are, you got a company car, well, okay, that's fine, but it says Martin's Aquarium on the side or something like that, so it's, we have to be reasonable with that, because, as we said, times are changing. and people, that's become more and more applicable to employment.
All right. Anything else? And I'll turn it over to our city planner. I appreciate the input tonight, or today, and I'll be back with changes next time we meet.
Thank you, Mr. Sherman. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, Mayor, and good morning, City Council.
Fences, so he left the easy one for you, huh?
There's actually going to be a lot of input on that as far as regulations, but we'll get to that. Again, I'm glad to be bringing the first round of LDC changes to you, hopefully the first of many. The first section I'll be covering is actually the definition section, which is not the most exciting section, but it does really lay the foundation for the sections I will be talking about and for future amendments. Maybe wait a little bit.
So we're going to definitions.
Definitions first, then fences, and then lastly signs. What's that? Okay, so the first definition I wanted to cover was a single family attached. That's actually not a definition in our land development code at all right now. And that's important when you're talking to developers about what potential type of development they want to do. The closest definition that we currently have is townhomes. So when we address later on the multifamily standards and non-residential standards, that would be an important definition to have. As far as the fences and structure definitions, that is more of an inconsistency issue that we have in our code right now. There's other sections in the land development code that state that fences are structures. But if you look in the structure definition, it says driveways, walkways, fences are not considered a structure. And that's a problem because in our sections for decorative fences, it's listed as a structure, and in the section that allows the city engineer to approve easements, fences and easements, it states that it's a structure. So that's just a inconsistency that we have that we wanted to address. The next definition is yard. That's actually currently in the code, but we did want to add an illustration. We get a lot of questions from homeowners, contractors that don't necessarily understand what a yard setback or just a setback in general is, so it's just an illustration for that. The next definition that we have is a corner yard. That's probably the one definition that trips up a lot of people the most, and staff, homeowners, contractors. So we did want to add in that definition to say it's a yard extending adjacent to a street, which is not considered the front yard. So if you have two frontages, one will be your front yard, the other will be your corner yard. And that's important when we talk about fences as well.
Can you go back to that?
Yes.
So, I'm not arguing this, I'm just trying to understand better. Depending on the character of the lot, what makes the corner yard extend from the front corner of the house to, what makes that the corner yard instead of the front yard going across? What's the,
Yeah. So, yeah, some houses, and I addressed that later on in the fence section, but some houses have your driveway, your entrances, and driveway entrances are usually on different sides, but the way I worded and proposed it is that it will, your corner yard, your front yard will be where you're addressed off of, and your corner yard would be the other yard.
no, I get that. My question is, go to the corner of the home there, the upper right-hand corner where the corner yard and the front yard meet at the corner wall of the house.
Yes.
In your diagram.
Mm-hmm.
Depending on the character of the yard, why is it this way and the corner yard continues vertically as opposed to the front yard continuing horizontally? Is that just an arbitrary decision that that's going to be a corner yard? Why couldn't the front yard go across the whole front?
Yes, it has to do with the way the bulk standards are. So there's charts for R10, R9, and et cetera. So the reason why it's touching along the home is, for instance, in the bulk standards, it's for R10, it's 20 feet. But right, it's arbitrary that it just extends all the way to the main street.
Okay, and I don't want to get ahead of you here, which I have a feeling I am, but that could be key in certain types of projects, depending on the character of the yard. Like my yard, I have that exact same scenario, and I would characterize it like you have it in this diagram. But there are other lots that are similarly situated where, because of the topography and the landscaping and stuff like that, that doesn't make sense. It would make more sense to draw the front yard all the way across.
All the way extending. One thing to also consider is with corner yards, you're going to have the visibility triangle, so the 30 and 30 feet down. So that would prohibit, structures within that limit and also fences, so.
Okay, and I'm not arguing that this should
I
be the
understand,
other way.
yeah.
I'm just saying that depending on what's going on here, one size might not always fit all.
And that would be,
Okay. I'll let it-
yeah, it's hard to do for every single scenario. Yeah. Okay. Moving on, we also wanted to amend our front, side, and rear definitions. The current definitions are okay. It's just the proposed definitions are a little more descriptive, especially when you already have a developed lot and you want to know where your boundaries are for your front, side, and rear. We also added a through lot definition. There's not too many in Temple Terrace, but it just wasn't in the land development code, so we wanted to add that, which is basically when you have two street frontages where they're parallel to each other. So that was it for the definition section. Do you guys have any questions before I move forward to fences? Okay.
No?
So this next section, it looks easy, but this is probably the one section where I'll need your input the most on this. So we didn't change this slide, but it's important to note for the PDs that if you're bound by a PD and fences are a part of your conditions, you would still have to meet the conditions. If it's silent in your PD, then you would meet the regular land development code standards. So moving on to heights, one clarification we wanted to have was that we get a lot of homeowners, contractors that ask, do we have to be 6 feet high for our fences in the side and rear yards? And the answer is no. It's up to 6 feet in height. So the way it's written right now is up to 7 feet. We did want to change it to 6 feet. That seems to be mostly what other jurisdictions are doing. I did see some feedback that maybe 7 feet is warranted if you have large dog braids, but currently right now we are changing it to 6 feet, and that's something council can discuss. But that seems to be the majority of jurisdictions have the max fence height at 6 feet.
So, Miranda, what's the basis for that recommendation? Have we had issues with the current code? Like, if we're gonna make a change, there should be a reason to make a change.
The main thing was, I've never seen 7 feet in residential areas. I've seen 7 feet in industrial and commercial areas. So the basis was I recommended that we go to 6 feet. There was no science behind it or anything like that.
There wasn't any issues so far in
Right.
code compliance or anything.
I'm not aware of ever getting any complaints
No.
about, I've never had a complaint from a citizen or had a code case or anything involving this. I'm just wondering, I'm not opposed to change, but if you're gonna change something, we ought to have some reason for changing. Yes, Councilmember Abel?
So assuming that maybe we do have some 7-foot fences at the moment, they would be grandfathered in, right? They wouldn't have to get a new fence if we changed it down
But
to.
they couldn't replace it.
They couldn't replace it with a 7-foot fence.
Yeah, they'll be bound by the non-conforming fences, which basically says as long as you have your fence and you can keep it.
Okay, thank you.
Vice Mayor?
Yeah, thank you. So if somebody wanted a 7-foot fence and had a reason, is this something that could go before Board of Adjustment, or this is just it?
I know in the past, fences have gone to Board of Adjustment, but by Florida statute, you're supposed to have a hardship, and that's supposed to be particular to the land itself, like topography is one I generally use, so they can apply, but then the Board of Adjustment is bound by Florida statutes where it says you need a hardship.
Okay. But it can go, right?
Can.
Yes, you can go to Board of Adjustment to get a fence that's higher. Cases I've seen before were corner lots, busy streets, and somebody says, I'm restricted to 4 feet or 6 feet, I need an 8-foot fence. And so I've seen them granted because of, it was something unique to that lot. That was their hardship. There was a lot of traffic going by their corner there, and so they were allowed to have an 8-foot fence. So
Okay.
it's possible.
But again, Marin, I can't speak for the rest of the council. I'm not aware of ever getting a complaint about this section of our code. I do know where people who have 7-foot fences, and typically it is a 6-foot privacy fence and they've added a foot of lattice or something on top of it. Typically, it's because the house is built up and there's some elevation and their yard goes down. 6-foot fence down there, they're looking out the back slider right into the neighbor's house because the front yard slopes down. So 6 feet really brings them up to here.
Understood. We can leave
If
it.
there's a problem that we're trying to fix, then I'm all in favor of it, but I'm not aware that we even have a problem.
No, it's as we were going through the fence section, we wanted to look at and
Yeah.
compare other jurisdictions, but if it's not a problem and city council.
I'm just
okay with
one
the 7,
person
we'll
on the
keep it.
council, but this hasn't been a problem for anybody that I'm aware of.
We were totally flat all over the place. So we have different elevations, and 6 foot really may end up only being 5 foot, or 7 foot may end up being 5 foot. If it ain't broke, don't fix.
Okay, we'll keep it the same. And then, like I said, we wanted to put in the language that says up to, so they're aware that they don't have to be at 6 or 7 feet high. The next section is, go ahead.
You're gonna hate me, I know. You got 3 words and I stop you, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
But
What do we want? So,
the chain link provision, I don't know if there's a good way to do this or if it's just unwieldy. So I just want you to look at this and think about it. There are some chain link fences that that are squeaking in under our code, and I don't think ought to be, but they are because they're the whole side yard thing and all that. But there also is, personally, I don't like that, which doesn't mean that we should enact a law just because Andy doesn't like it, but where people are putting stuff into the chain link and weaving things through the chain link to make it a solid, so you can't see through it. And there's at least one that I know of that's right there on an intersection, and so people approaching the stop sign, you can't see. You used to be able to see, but you can't anymore because they've woven this stuff through their fence. And the material they use is like a wire with Christmas tree green plastic stuff through it. And I don't even know where they got this, but they must have bought a shipping container full of this stuff because they've woven this all through their fence. So it looks like in their mind, it looks like a hedge. In my mind, it does not. And it's first of all, it's hideous, and second of all, it's obscuring the view of traffic. But I know that if you read our code, that we're stuck with this the way the code is, and so I just would ask you to kind of talk to Mr. Baroni about this and see if there's a way to. I mean, they're grandfathered in. I'm not trying to go after any, but we need to close this gap so that we don't get a proliferation of Christmas tree fences.
I agree. It doesn't look
Gotta stop.
appealing. Which I'm glad you brought up chain link fences because I did want to ask the city council: do you want to still allow chain link fences, or do you want to remove chain link fences in general?
Councilmember Abel.
My feeling is, depends on how close to the street it is. If it's between houses, I don't care if it's a chain link fence. I mean, it's up to the the homeowner.
So corner through lots, is that,
Yeah, and, even if someone has a backyard, and they have a chain link fence, at the edge of their house, their front-facing edge of the house, I don't mind that either. But if it's, at least I think so, in the context I'm thinking of, I don't mind that. But in the, if it's something that's like along a street, on the side of the house, I feel like that should be an opaque, fence. But I haven't thought it all the way through yet, now that I'm saying that.
But the code currently addresses some of what you're talking. I'm tracking with you. I mean, I hear what you're saying. I don't want to be overly restrictive, but I think the code already kind of talks about some of that, depending on the lot size, how far back from the road you has to be.
yeah, and another thing I wanted to point out with chain link fences is that the code currently requires chain link fences with landscaping. And I don't know if it's actually been a problem here. Maybe Tom can speak to that. But I think that's a hard thing to enforce with your permitting and chain link fence. And one, the property owner can initially have the landscaping, but I think it's hard to enforce the maintenance of the landscaping along that chain link fence. So that's also something to consider removing, or removing chain link fences in general. So.
I don't know.
Are we talking about just the backyard, side yards and backyards?
Back and side yards, yeah. The rear and sides.
Well, personally, I don't think we need to ban those from those areas. They're fine.
Okay.
And landscaping, unless it's the side yard in the front, we don't control the backyards.
Yeah.
Correct?
Correct.
So,
Just the areas that are visible to the public, so
right,
the side.
okay. I don't have a problem with,
No
side-
heartburn?
No heartburn on the side yards, and I don't even mind slats. And for the side yards.
Okay. All right. So the next section, PowerPoint went away. Okay, here it is. So the next portion is talking about the decorative fences. So one thing that was brought up with code compliance was there was arguments that when you buy fence sections, that they only come in 2-foot sections. So when we have a requirement for up to 3, we've been hearing complaints that they can only buy in 2 and 4 and 6. So we wanted to change that to say up to 4 feet, and also clarify that decorative fences are only allowed in the front yard. So you can't have a non-decorative fence in the front yard. We do get questions. It's not really clear in the land development code, so that's just a clarifying statement. For letter,
Time out. So is this changing it from 3 feet to 4 feet in height
yes, for decorative,
for decorative fences?
Yes.
And that's only going to be allowed in the front yard?
only in the front.
Okay, a question is, what's our site height for,
So that was my next statement. Are you talking about the visibility triangle?
yes?
Yes,
4
okay.
feet's okay?
Yeah, so going up to D, right now I did have it removed, but I think it's okay if we say up to 3 feet because the visibility distance is 3 to 8 feet. So if you're on a corner lot, yeah, you might have something that's 3 feet only in the visibility triangle and then 4. But for lots that are not on the corner yard, you can have up to 4 feet in your front yard. It's just when you get those corner lots or through lots, that's going to be where it's most difficult to enforce the visibility.
Maybe not for you, but a question on height on our landscaping for like commercial parking lots and other places, if they have a hedge, is it 3 feet or 4 feet for hedges? 3? 3 feet, okay, so this would correspond with that. Since commercial lots, it's out by the road.
Right.
Well, this would go to 4.
This would go to 4, except unless you have a corner lot and it's a
You
sight
still
line.
have to meet visibility triangle. That's correct.
Okay.
Okay.
And we have had complaints about the material.
Oh, yeah, it
that
comes in
only
4-foot
comes in
sections. Yep.
4-foot sections,
Yep.
and they can't get 3 foot. You know, they want to put up a beautiful, like aluminum wrought iron kind of looking, and they can't, it doesn't come in 3 feet.
So with the single-family residences, we allowed, with the proposed language, decorative fences up to 4 feet in height. I did want to ask council what they thought about when you have a wall do you want to keep it at 3 or 4 feet? Because now if you have a brick wall or a stucco masonry wall, you may feel differently about that going to 4 feet.
What's the front yard setback for something like that?
You can have your fences in the front yard as long as it's decorative. There is no
Up to the
setback.
right of way.
Yeah.
I would think that a wall should be limited to 3 feet.
3 feet.
Looking old compound-ish, like.
And that's what I was thinking as well, so. But if you did want to keep it consistent, you could go up to 4.
I think the 4 foot is a concession to the reality that that's the size of the material comes in.
Yeah, so.
If we could get the material in any size you wanted it, I'd be in favor of limiting that to 3 feet like it is too. But the reality is you can't get 3 foot material. But you can build a 3 foot wall.
Exactly, okay. Okay, the next portion is discussing easements. I'm gonna actually move to my illustration first, and I'll come back to that language. But in general, when you have a platted subdivision, you're gonna have a dedication portion in the subdivision, and that describes if you're gonna have any type of drainage easements, utility easements, right-of-way easements, and who's it dedicated to, the public, or is it a private easement? And when you look into the illustration below, it has a 15-foot drainage and utility easements. Currently, right now in the code, you may be allowed to have a fence within that limit, but I know some jurisdictions, you have to actually go through a vacate process. So I'm sure you guys have seen where an applicant wants to propose a right-of-way vacate or a utility easement vacate. But currently in Temple Terrace, we do allow fences and easements as long as you get permission from the city. It's just the mechanism is not very clear, so we wanted to add some language on what you'll need. So if you look at the language for number 3, it says you have to obtain permission from the city, obtain authorization from the dedicatee of the easement. So if it's a utility easement, you'll need permission from the utility company. And then I think C and D are important to allow a gate so that if it's a utility easement, that the utility companies can still access that easement. And then 4 is a protection that if the city or the utility company needs to, for some reason, remove the fence, then they're not liable for any cost to do any work within that easement, and that's drainage, utilities, or any other type of easement.
Miranda, I gotta tell you, I mean, we can have a discussion. I don't like this.
Okay.
I do not like it, and I'll tell you why. I have a backyard that has a utility easement down the back. We all do. The power line runs behind our whole row of houses. I've had to replace my fence twice in the decades that I've lived in my house. I do not want the additional hurdle to jump through. Have you ever tried to get documentation from TICO on anything?
It does take.
Right? And I have to get a permit from the city to get to, which means I have to have a survey, and I've always done this. But now for me to have to go to TICO and try to squeeze some kind of documentation out of them for them to allow me to replace I don't want to do that. And that being said, has this been a problem for people in the city somehow? Is there a problem here that we need to fix? Has this come up as some kind of an issue for somebody? Because if it is, then maybe we need to fix it. But if we're just doing this to clean up language, this is a big hurdle for people to have to get over to replace their fence.
So I think I would tend to agree on the other utilities. On our utilities, what we found, and to varying degrees, is that, for example, if you have a drainage easement, people will put a fence up, and they'll put a fence, and then the neighbor will put up a fence. Pretty soon the whole drainage easement is fenced off. If there's major water, major storm, and there's debris and things like that, eventually that's going to lead to just more sediment buildup, and your whole drainage swale area is probably going to be contoured differently. So that's been an issue. I think staff is pretty much hands-off, like, we don't want to mess up people's lives with their yards and like that, so we don't say a lot. But if we do have to go in and do maintenance, and there isn't a gate and there's a water main, for example, let's just say there's a water pipe in this easement, we're going to tear out that fence and we're not going to replace the fence, which is probably today's practice anyway. I think they're trying to clarify this language here. If the council's okay, I think one thing we could definitely look at is just taking out, we're not going to regulate everybody else's easement, so
Just the cities.
just the city's easement.
That's correct. It's not for private easements. It's not for private easements, just for public.
Well, I'd be all right with that because we're easy to get a hold of. I mean, nobody in this city lives more than 3 miles from this building. So I'd be comfortable.
There is one thing that they did add here, if you could go back to, thank you. The gate is something that probably doesn't exist today as a requirement. I'm not sure if it does or not.
It's not, and that's why I wanted to propose that language.
Right, so that is something different, that if
Okay
people.
with that, too.
Okay.
I just don't want to have to write to Tico and, I mean, you know how it is. We can't get information from Tico as a city. As a homeowner, you're, good luck. Yes.
Okay, I don't, what I missed, but I'm a little confused over the discussion. Sounds like you're talking about if you want to replace your fence, you need permission from all the easement
That's what
holders.
that's what it says.
Are we talking item D?
Item B.
Okay, I'm focused on item D, if I was reading that wrong. Okay.
I don't mind, I would be comfortable if it was just a city easement, because that wouldn't be that hard to get.
Right.
And maybe that's something the city attorney can chime in on about requiring public easements. Because I know when you go to vacate an easement, if you were trying to vacate the utility easement or the drainage easement, you would need to go through the vacate process. And one of those things is to get letters of authorization from that. I do understand the additional cost, but generally when you go through a vacate, you also need their permission. So allowing a fence, would that cause a problem?
If you're wanting to vacate a right-of-way or vacate an easement, yes, you have to get the permission of the person who owns the easement rights, obviously, because now you're taking it away from them. But here, this entails a blocking, a possible blocking of the use of it. But I think that it's important that we always somehow, either on the permit, that would be the best place, but here too, we could say, if you don't get permission from from all easement holders, utilities, then you're subject to having to have the fence removed. Because if TECO does come along and need to access their easement, and now you've put we've seen people put walls in our easement, actually, it wasn't even our easement, I think it was actually our land. It ends up having to get removed, and we're not fixing it, and TECO's not going to fix it either, so you're sort of operating at your own risk. So.
Can we just drop B?
Well, I think to the city manager's point, we need something in there to protect the city's access to,
Well,
but
wouldn't that come under A?
What is a dedicatee?
what if we what?
A dedicatee would be like Tico? What does that word mean?
Yeah, that would be the person that the easement is dedicated to. So,
So, okay, so Ms. Anaya, if we just, to Councilmember Schizzler's suggestion, if we just dropped B and we keep it as A, obtain permission from the city, will that suffice for our purposes here?
Yeah, and I might want to expand upon A and say for city easements or city-owned easements, and then I think that would make everyone more comfortable. And then as part of the permit, maybe we can condition that something along the lines like you should obtain permission, but we're not going to hold the permit for that, as
Yeah,
far as the
that-
private stuff. So
or tell people just,
FYI
yeah,
or something.
beware that there are other entities that may have an easement in this area.
I think that would work.
We good?
Good.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, so the next section is about location. Again, these are questions that we get from contractors, homeowners about if they can have decorative fences on their side and rear yards. Yes, you can, and the intent is just to make sure that decorative fences are in the front yard. So that's to clarify, and then we also added fences and walls shall not be permitted on vacant property. And another question that we also get from property owners is how far does the fence have to be from the side yard? And really that goes into a private matter. You share the property line with your neighbor. So we do say it's recommended to offset it a little bit so that way you're not projecting over into their property line, but that's more of a private matter and recommendation. And then we did add some language for waterfront lots. So if you wanted to have a fence in the rear yard, you would have to be 15 feet from the jurisdictional wetland line or high water line, whichever is greater. And it must be non-opaque and cannot exceed 4 feet in height. And that's consistent with the language that we just included. And then lastly, if it's on publicly owned lands, then we can have deviations from those standards. We did not change the orientation. Your finished side must still be the side that faces outward.
Miranda, what is the purpose of bullet B? Fences or walls shall not be permitted on vacant land. What's the intent of that?
I have seen where it's more of a code enforcement issue, like if you have a vacant piece of property and you're storing items there, or just storage in general. It's a way for them to hide whatever materials that they're storing on site. We can remove that. I know some people argue about security reasons. They want to
Well, I could see a
vacant property, but it's mostly when you have people that, why do you want to fence your vacant land? And it's usually because they want to store materials, but I also see it from a security standpoint.
What if it was that solid fences or walls shall not be permitted on vacant land? Because I know there's an empty lot in my neighborhood. It has a chain link fence around it. I mean, you can clearly see through there.
Through there.
But obviously they're trying to keep people from camping in there or whatever they think's going to happen in there, so.
Well, that was my, so I have a piece of property and it's vacant, and maybe it's wooded, or maybe it's just a field or whatever, and I get people coming onto my property and sleeping and camping and everything else, and, you know, I'm liable. Somebody comes on that property and gets hurt, they're coming at me. So I want to put up a fence and keep people off my property. Well, now I can't. So the city's not going to assume the liability. So you're forcing me to be in a libelous, I don't know. Again, is there a problem that we're trying to fix? Because
We can put an opaque if you want, or just eliminate that at all. It's just a consideration I have.
'Cause
It's not a problem.
I do, in the past, particularly when I was in code board, I mean, I remember being some problem pieces of property that I wish we had the power to order them to put a fence up. A fence would be, in some cases, in everybody's best interest. In fact, we've even talked about fencing off the old restaurant down there that we're getting ready to tear down. We talked about fencing that off at one point, and that's us.
Yeah.
So I don't know about that. Council?
I mean, I think we should allow fences. I don't know if we should say opaque or not. That just limits it to wide slat fence or chain link.
Code enforcement, what do you, any input on this?
I don't know of any problem.
Well, come up here.
I'm sorry.
It's okay.
We want this to work well for you guys, so.
Yeah, I don't know of any properties in the city that we have a problem with. I can't see why they can't have a fence around the perimeter of the vacant lot. So I'm not aware of any issues.
Not a problem for you.
Yep.
I think that if you do put up a solid fence or wall around a vacant lot, then you don't know what's happening behind there. You know, people could be camping there. I mean, I don't know if there's a problem here with people camping or sleeping or something, but I know in other cities, there's definitely a problem of vagrants camping out in vacant lots. And if you could not see them, you just don't know what's happening. So it seems that a fence would be a good idea, as long as you could at least see through it.
Is that the consensus?
I'm good with that.
That seems to be the way that you're leaning to.
Right.
Mr. Sherman?
I have no issues, just that if there's a front yard fence on a vacant lot, would it need to be decorative as well?
How would we know it's a front yard?
Well, it's on the street.
The address?
Yes, sir. That's the only thing I was thinking, which might,
Right, and if it's vacant or not built on, how do you control if it's just an empty lot?
how do you control what's the front?
Yeah, I mean, how far the setback is if there's no structure on it?
Well, it can be, if it's decorative, it's in the front. The front setback up would be 35 feet, I
Okay.
believe. So you would go back at least 35 feet. If you want something besides decorative, I would imagine. But it does get a little tricky when there's not a structure on the property.
I would say no to that, because I'm thinking of the property that the city attorney referred to. It's in a residential neighborhood. I'm assuming it's zoned residential. I don't know what else it would be zoned. It's a building lot. It's woods. It's never been built on, and it has a chain link fence around it now, which seems pretty appropriate to me. It keeps people out of it.
And then when it was being developed at some later date, would we require them to take the chain
Yeah.
link fence in the front?
Yeah,
Okay.
when it's no longer vacant, then the rules for front yard would apply, but right now, it's not a yard. It's a vacant piece of property. It's a wooded lot. A 4-foot decorative fence is not going to serve the purpose that it's intended. I mean, that's not gonna keep anybody out.
I have another.
Yep, Vice Mayor.
So does vacant mean nothing on it or not occupied?
Well, if it's a single-family home, what should be built, if it's a single-family residential zoning, what should be built on it should be the principal use, which is a single-family home.
No, but the question is the word vacant. If you have, like,
What if the house is empty?
what if the house is empty and it's been for sale for a year? Is that vacant?
That's not what I meant, like.
Okay, I was just clarifying.
I think that's good.
Well, then the question of the building on the old Curry Bowl, that's not vacant then.
Right.
Just trying to
point.
clarify.
Good point. Mr. Schisler?
Two quirky issues. One, how would the backyard fence being potentially decorative only change if there was a pool back there? An unlocked, an unlanai pool, for example.
Well, the Florida Building Code requires screening, a screen cage or a fence, I believe.
Okay, but do we need that in here?
Now, we would defer to the building code. We would allow fences, but if you had a fence, it would have to meet our land development code. Or if you had a screen enclosure, it would have to meet land development code and building code as well.
Okay, so that would require a 6-foot fence. I mean, there's
Yeah, I
pools
believe
out there
a
without
4-foot fence is
enclosures.
allowed with
Pardon me?
I believe a 4-foot fence is allowed with a pool.
Without a screened
Yes, sir.
enclosure?
I believe so,
Okay,
just by what I see in my neighborhood.
okay, all right, because I've seen that also. The other thing is, could we or should we include in here private retention ponds that have no screen, the city retention ponds, I think, have fences all around them. We have private retention ponds that have no fences.
So Troy can probably weigh in on this so stormwater ponds are regulated by the Water Management District, and if you get over a greater slope than 4-to-1, you require fence. I think that's the slope requirement. If it's a gentle slope, then it doesn't require, based on the district regulations, I believe, for a fence. So that's what we normally defer to on a fence around a pond. Is that kind of correct? Troy?
So for, for safety reasons, we fence our ponds, our stormwater ponds.
Well, I got two private ponds in my two private retention ponds in my neighborhood that, I don't know what the slope is of it. I don't know, but no fencing, total access from three sides.
Yeah, that would be the HOA's determination to make, as well as the water management district if
Okay.
they
All right, so
require that.
we don't care as long as it's, depending upon the slope.
Right.
Okay.
Yes, Councilmember Abel.
I have a question about letter A. Could you pull that up again, please? Thanks. So I think just the way this reads, maybe it's just me, but the way this reads, kind of, well, to me, it sounds like you have to have a decorative fence in your front yard. And I don't have one, and neither does anyone else in my neighborhood. But I know that it's saying, like, if you have a fence in your front yard, then it must be a decorative type. But the way it reads, it's like decorative fence materials are required in the front yard. I don't know if I'm just reading it funny, but it sounds like everybody has to have this in their front yard or they're breaking some kind of rule. We're a city that requires that. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, so new fence permits will require decorative fence. And I don't know if this is answering, we're not going back and do code enforcement after folks who don't have them.
No, I
I
understand.
think it's a grammar issue.
Yeah, I think it's a grammar
I
thing.
agree.
It's just a word, it's worded a little clunky.
Grammarly, I
Yeah.
should run the Grammarly check on that
It's
one.
worded a little clunky.
I don't think Grammarly is going to help you, but I think
Front yard
Jeannie,
she's good at this.
work on that.
I see what you're saying. You're saying if you have a decorative fence,
Yes.
then
Yes.
it has to be.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Yeah, Jeannie, or somebody, yeah, that just, it's an English
We'll
thing.
work on the language.
It should say that front yard fences must be of decorative fence material.
Yes.
Yes.
There you go.
That's why she's the attorney.
That's why I was an English major.
Me too.
All right, so now we're moving on to the materials portion for fences and walls. We did take out some of the language. It's just in other areas of the code. And then as far as number B, non-decorative fence materials, we included that to say that you can have solid brick, solid masonry, or other similar in appearance. We did take that from other jurisdictions in the nearby area. We also wanted to add prohibited uses. I think it was discussed that we're still allowing chain link, so that would be removed. But something that's more common is the sheet metal, which is the picture on the right, and it's pretty hideous. So wanted to add that in because I know more and more people are requesting that type of material, and just wanted to make sure that the residential neighborhoods are protected from that. If there's any other materials City Council would like to add as far as prohibited or allowed, we can look at that as well. If not, I will keep moving forward. Okay. The next section, we didn't change at all. That's just describing maintenance and structural integrity. The landscaping we touched on, I'll take another look on that. I was going to completely remove that in general, but again, that's the portion that requires, if you're going to have a chain link fence, that you must have landscaping. But I can look at that again. It's just contradictory between A and B. But if City Council wants to remove the requirement for landscaping with chain link fences, we can do that, or I can just remove that in general. So, the next section, we left the same. That's regarding non-residential standards. We left that completely alone. And lastly, the last section for the fence sections is regarding corner lots. So we've had issues in permitting with the corner lots, or trying to replace your fence in the corner lot. The reason for that is that going back to this depiction on the right-hand side is you'll see the corner yards, and it states that if you're on a corner lot, you have to meet corner yard setbacks. The issue with that is when you have your bulk standards like R10, R9, R7, R7.5, those are large setbacks. In R10, I believe it's 20 or 25 feet, and that's what you're bound to with the fence regulations as well. And obviously that's a problem. You want to have your fence as close to the right-of-way as possible. So the new language would say corner yard setbacks for fences or walls shall be 5 feet from the property line. I did propose that a little bit conservative. We could have 0 property line. It's up to city council on that. But that would be a major improvement from requiring a fence 20 feet back rather than the 5 or 0 feet from the property line. Now you're looking at visibility. How close do you want that fence, or do you even care?
I'm the least equipped up here, so bear with me, all right? I don't know, I don't feel qualified to answer that. I don't know what so you say you're proposing 5 feet. Or we could go to 0 feet, or 1 feet, or 2 feet. I don't know what the purpose of that setback is and how to make that decision and what is customary. I don't feel qualified to make that decision, so help me out. Maybe they all know, but help me out. Help me understand. Is 5 an arbitrary number, or?
It is, and that really, so one is to reduce it so that way we're not restricting people to 20 or 25 feet, whatever the bulk standards is. And the second thing, as far as the 5 or the 0, for instance, if you look at South Street, it just depends on how far you want that fence to sit back, and that's more of a visual impact. That's in every jurisdiction, that's going to be arbitrary. It's up to the board to decide that, but I did propose it at 5 feet. It's just your visible impacts. If you have a wall, do you want to stare at a wall right where the right-of-way is, or do you want it set back a little bit further?
I can see where you're talking about. I don't know, Council, what do you got?
Is there any public safety concerns, a car losing control, hitting a brick wall, or, I mean, is that?
Could be a part of your consideration. And again, this is not for corner yards that have an easement. So if you have an easement, it'll be outside, or you have to get approval, as we just mentioned. So these are yards, lots that do not have any type of easement. It's just how far do you want it back, but that could be a consideration.
Yes, City Manager.
Probably only going to complicate this, but there are entire swaths of neighborhoods in this city too that the right-of-way line, where the property line, the right-of-way line is pretty set back. Like if you were going down the street, you would think these people have enormous front yards, but in fact, they don't have enormous front yards because that's just right-of-way. And if we ever came through and built a sidewalk like we did in some of these neighborhoods, then you notice the difference. So if you do have a 25 or 35-foot setback, it only compounds that in those neighborhoods, because then the fence is, I mean, it's way back in the yard.
Yeah, because the first 12 feet are right away, and then you got 25 feet from there.
Exactly. So I think that's another thing that staff is trying to get at, is trying to find a happy medium where we could address a lot of our residents' concerns that have come up in the past, particularly, obviously, folks that live on the corners, they're the biggest impact from this type of regulation.
Okay. But, man, I'm just trying to think through what the right thing is here, because if there's a 12-foot right-of-way, I don't know is that a normal right, I mean, what?
15.
Okay, so 12 or 15-foot right-of-way, in that scenario, we might not care that it's 5 feet back from the property line, because they're already 15 feet off the road.
Today, if we ever came through and built a sidewalk and a pertinent swale and everything, they wouldn't be 15 feet anymore. But today, yes, they would, and for the foreseeable future, until we come up with a project, they would probably stay that way for quite some time.
But even in the future, if we came up and built a sidewalk and stuff, the fence or the wall would be close to the sidewalk. Correct. We still wouldn't be close to the road.
Correct. Is that from the curb?
What's that?
Is the right-of-way from the curb or the middle of the street, or?
I'm just envisioning a scenario where they can't put a fence at all, because
Yeah.
by the time you take the right of way and then there's nothing left.
What's it
So
like in-
for the most part, your roadway is going to be the center of the right of way, not always, typically.
I'm sorry, say it
The
again.
center of the roadway is the center of your right of way. So you have a 50-foot or 60-foot right of way for a roadway section. So the center of the road, 25 each side. Lane width's usually around 10. So then that leaves you with 15 feet off the curb to put other utilities or put sidewalks or do whatever you would like. So then your property line actually starts at that point. It does not start at the curb line, does not start at the sidewalk edge, unless the sidewalk edge is right on the right-of-way line.
So if you say 10 feet back or 5 feet back, it's, you said 25 for the center of the, 25 each way?
Yeah, just if you want to go with a 50-foot section, yes. Most of our rights-of-way are 50 to 60 feet. Some of them are larger, but that's kind of your typical.
So if you did 5 feet beyond that, you're actually 30 feet, no, you're 30 feet from the center of the highway.
Yes,
That 30 feet from the center of the road, or 20 feet back from the curb.
the only issue I would really see is making sure that residents understand they have to actually maintain all the way to the edge of the roadway within our right-of-way. It's a city ordinance. That they need to make sure that they don't neglect that portion of their property. Where I would see this being an issue, if you don't put it on your property line for your rear yard, then you could have a problem where you've got a small swath of grass, which we've had in a couple of instances, that no one maintains. And it gets overgrown and unruly. I mean, I guess I don't see an issue with putting it right at the right-of-way line, unless there's a site triangle issue. So right at the property line in the front yard.
So
You
the
see-
current state of things, Miranda, under the current code, from wherever the right-of-way is, which is somewhere in that person's yard, corner yard, right, up to 15 feet maybe into that corner yard, they can't put a fence within 25 feet of that.
Depending on what zoning district, but yes, in one of the zoning districts, it is 25 feet, so that's,
What is it in the other residential?
I think it ranges from 15 to 25, which
Okay,
is a
so
lot.
there's 15 to 25 feet. So wherever that right-of-way falls, they can't put a fence now from 15 to 25 feet in. And what we're being proposed or asked to do is to approve reducing that to 5 feet.
Exactly. Or we can go with the 0 if Troy said he doesn't have any
Okay,
problems with.
so you came up with 5 for a reason and didn't come up with 0.
Right.
So why did you think 5 was better than 0?
I with the more conservative approach. I've seen 5 feet in other jurisdictions, and I've also seen 0. I just went with the more conservative because other jurisdictions have said it's a visual impact. But it depends if you have a sidewalk, if you have the right of way, if you have the street and then the sidewalk, then you're already having a distance back. But it's really just an arbitrary thing. I just went with the more conservative approach. So I would be fine as well with 0 feet.
I struggle with this because we're writing rules that apply to everybody, but depending on that situation of that yard, 0 might make sense, or no, in this case, 10 makes sense.
Right.
So is the only concern the visibility triangle though? As far as like what safety? Is what I was thinking of. Because as long as there's no fencing in the visibility triangle, they should be able to go up to the property line. I don't see why not. Then of course, it's not being in an easement, but in this scenario, we're not thinking about easement, so.
All right, council, what are we
What about
doing here?
consistency through the neighborhood? Or do we not care? You could have, you could come up with the way our zoning looks, I mean, our city boundary looks like off of Fowler Avenue. That type of thing. Do we want to make it any kind of consistency on the same street?
No, that's a nightmare.
No, I know, I'm just saying, it just gets hinky.
Councilmember Abel, thank you.
Going along with, I'm sorry, what's your name?
Malik.
Malik. Going along with what he said, about the safety issue and the site triangle, I think that should be the only reason not to build up to 0, unless they don't want to. I mean, I feel like the safety issue of the site triangle maybe should be part of the language in there, if that's something that we think should be included.
It is. I think we went over that previously, but with the way it's worded, it's up to 3 feet in the visibility triangle, so you would still only be allowed 3 feet, but in other areas, that's when you can go up to the 6 or 7 feet. So in any case, you would have to meet the visibility triangle.
Okay.
And I like 0,
You like 0?
with the sightline rules.
Do you mind expounding on that a little bit, just
No,
for my
because I'm just,
edification?
no, I'm just confused.
Help me out, because I'm struggling.
I don't know why it was 5. 0 sounds like it's 0.
Well, generally speaking,
I
I'm in
mean-
favor of giving people more freedom to do what they need to do on their property unless it impacts somebody else negatively. So I think I'm in favor of 0 also, but I don't know. City manager, what do you think?
Okay. The last resort of this one, huh? To me, it's, if there's not a visibility issue, I think from a regulatory perspective that having it 0 really, it can be fine. I don't think, as long as there's no visibility. Visibility I'm concerned about because there are definitely, particularly the way our streets are laid out, the weird angles for these intersections and things like that, I think we'd want to make sure that we cover as many of those possibilities as possible in the rewrite. I think what Councilmember Schizzler was talking about before about this is going to happen, sort of these ins and outs, because there are these neighborhoods, again, that the right-of-way, you can't even tell where the right-of-way is, again, because it's not been built out. So the first time somebody puts a fence up and it's going to go right to the right-of-way line, it's probably going to look weird until the next party down the road does the same thing, and eventually it'll probably be fine. But that's just the nature of it. I think it would happen regardless. If we kept 25 and 35, you're going to have this fence way back. I do know that we have gotten concerns about this from property owners, so this is one of the reasons we're trying to address it. And having been raised on a corner lot in my hometown in Massachusetts, I know this is an issue. And so you kind of lose property as an owner because you don't have access all the way to the edge of your property like everybody else does in essence. So I don't know if that was much of an answer to your question, but I tried.
How about, I don't know if I'm overcomplicating this or not, but is there a practical way without creating this Pandora's box here? Is there a practical way to say if the right-of-way line is 15 feet or over, then you can go 0? If the right-of-way line is less than 15 feet, then you have to have a so much foot setback for every foot. Because what we don't want is now you're in a neighborhood where maybe the right-of-way off the edge of the road, the right-of-way is only 4 feet or so. So those people can go, whoosh. Now you've got a 6-foot fence or a wall 4 feet from the road, which does look, because the way it is today, you can't do that within 25 feet. So we're going from 25 feet to 0. And you're going to build this fence or wall, and people are going to come in here and go, "Oh my God, what are you people smoking?" Right? How did you let this happen? If the right of way is 15 feet off the road, going to a 0, not so bad. But if the right of way is 4 feet off the road, going to 0 could be a problem. Is there a practical way to make a graduated? If it's 15 feet or 12 feet or more, then you can go to 0. Mm-hmm. If it's less than 12 feet, you have to be 4 feet off of it or 5 feet off of it. Is that practical?
We can look into it.
Well, you have to, right? You have to have a permit to build a fence. I don't want to create something that's unworkable, but you see where I'm trying to get to something that the people, where there's 15 feet of right of way, we shouldn't be penalizing people and they can't use their property. Mm-hmm. They're losing use of that property, and then they come up with a 5-foot additional setback. for what reason? That doesn't, all we've done is slice their backyard and create this property that they own and they have to maintain and they can't meaningfully use.
Yep.
On the other hand, is 4 feet off the road and the site triangle's not an issue and they build a fence 4 feet from the road, that does affect the complexion of the neighborhood.
But
Yes.
I feel like we're really getting somewhere on this, but I need to take a restroom break soon, so I don't know when the stopping point is, but I hope it's soon.
This is the last portion.
Okay.
Fences, so.
I just, question.
Yes.
I'm still a little confused. So when we're talking about the fences and the, up to the easement line or whatever line we've been talking about, those would be decorative fences only because they're past the front side of the house, correct? We don't allow anything higher than 6 feet in the front yard or anything, we don't allow 6-foot fences out there. So the 4-foot fences all the way out to the road is allowed and it doesn't create a site problem.
No, but the side yard here, the corner yard, that could go out here, that could be up to 6 feet.
But that's not the way it is now.
The way it is now, they have to be 25 feet off the right-of-way line.
I always thought it was from the edges of the houses. You can't exceed going out past your house.
No, according to what they just said, it has to be 25 feet off of the right.
Okay, right now, can you build a 6-foot fence? Does your front yard, does your side yards extend towards the road currently? Does it extend towards the road past the front of your house?
So, yeah, in the front yard, it has to be decorative fence, but on the other
I
side.
know, but what's considered the front yard? Where so many feet from the,
Past your.
the line or-
building line, yeah.
so if you have a house here and the walls are here, if you go 2 feet past the house towards your front yard, that's not allowed now.
You would have to be decorative, yeah.
Okay,
is only up to
so very easy, it's the sides of the houses.
It's the side.
But the corner yard, I think.
Still the sides of the houses. I have a corner yard. It's the sides of the house, on both sides. Is that correct the way it is now? If you have a corner lot, you can't exceed either way? Somebody?
You can have up to the 6 feet on the other side. That's not your front yard.
So you can extend past that 6 feet out?
Yes. I think I got what you're saying.
No.
Is there a pointer?
From the house toward the street, you talking about extending from the house line toward the street on the side?
The document that I'm seeing there on the corner lot, where the fence line is, the dark black line, that's what I thought is what is allowed now.
So if we're looking at this photo from where you see front yard going towards Main Street, you would only be allowed to have a fence up to 4 feet as proposed. From South Street, right now, you can have it up to 6 feet. But when you're getting
Past the
into,
edge, past the corner of your house on South Street.
yes.
Two separate things.
Go up and
You're
use the
you're talking about
diagram.
going this way, right?
I'm saying you
Are you
can't do
gonna fence you
that.
went
Can
this
you
way?
do that now?
That's the question.
Say that one more time.
Can you put a fence from here to here, this way?
Not,
Is that-
can you do this?
Yeah.
Can you do that now?
Are you
No.
talking about height or?
Yeah, I mean, a 6-foot fence.
Yes, you can have a 6-foot fence
You can do
on
this
that
with a
side,
6-foot
yes.
fence?
Yes.
I have that.
Mike's
same
saying no, you're saying yes.
6-foot fence, but I thought you were talking about the separation from the right-of-way on far end.
Yeah, I'm almost with Meredith here on this one. Okay, that's what I thought it was now, so maybe it's not.
No, I have that scenario that you're asking about, and I'm assuming it's legal because it was done with a permit.
And I don't, and I was told no, that I couldn't go past my garage.
Okay,
All
so
right, so we don't know, wait,
let's
take a break.
let's take about 3 minutes.
Yeah, I've got to
And
go.
let Councilmember Abel come back and
Let me go.
let the Vice Mayor run. So we'll take about 3 minutes. Okay, ladies and gentlemen. All right. So during the brief break, I had a little bit of a sidebar conversation with our code enforcement director, who was bringing up yet some other issues on the fence placement thing concerning corner lots and side yards and corner yards, I guess is the correct phrase, and some challenges that his department's having right now about what's in compliance, what's not, what was built that is no longer in compliance, and yet there was something built with permit that doesn't. My yard that was built with a permit conflicts somewhat with this too. So I don't know that we're gonna get this nailed down today. Maybe this needs a little more discussion. I think we're generally,
Yeah.
we got a lot of stuff that I think you got a head nod on until we got hung up on this corner yard setback issue. And can we have a discussion after you guys have had a chance to kind of huddle up on this? Mr. Baroni's showing me some pictures and stuff that I'm like, well, and I don't know that this is the place to have that whole fleshed out, but
Yeah, we can get with, we'll have community development get with code.
yeah.
Have a conversation about the practical issues that he's facing and Mr. Baroni's facing, and then we'll try and finesse the language and bring it back to the next
Yeah,
session.
yeah, okay. No, I think all the other stuff, I think we were in agreement with, okay.
To
Okay,
be fair, corner yards are usually the most complex portion
are,
of
they
fences,
are.
so I didn't expect that to be quick as far as that goes, but good. I will bring back, when we come back next time, I'll bring some more examples, and maybe that would help with deciding whether it's the 5 or the 0 foot setback, and going into more detail and working with Tom on that, so.
and don't be frustrated with us. This is the
Not a.
noise, signs, fences, those are the hardest issues so please bear with us.
Okay, speaking of signs, we're going into signs.
Here we go.
All right, this this section I'm hoping will be much shorter than the fences, but we'll see. All right, this one.
I'm sorry. You've done a phenomenal job, the whole staff with this whole scenario.
All right, let me find my page. Okay. Is it loading? Oh, okay. It just popped up. There we go. Yeah, thank you. All right. So moving on with the signage, we wanted to amend this section because there's issues with permitting that we have right now, and we're trying to amend this code so that it's easier on staff, on contractors, and for the tenants. Specifically, one of the issues that we're having is if you look at the photo, you have a plaza, there's multiple tenants, and right now the way the land development code is worded is that your maximum wall signage allowance can only be 20% of the building facade. And that poses a problem because you have multiple tenants, you have different contractors, and the property owner is usually not involved in pulling any of the permits. So what that creates is either burdensome on staff or burdensome on the tenant, because when you have a maximum allowance for the whole facade, you have to have a mechanism. And usually what I've seen in other jurisdictions is you have like a running total. So you have to keep track of each and every single permit to know if you're meeting that threshold or you're exceeding the threshold of the 20%. So what community development is proposing is that we do it based on the individual tenant. And so you, for example, we're proposing 1.5 times the bay width. So if you have a 20-foot wide bay width, you would take 1.5, and that will give you a 35 square footage allowance. That is a much easier to track than either staff having a running total or putting the burden on the applicant. So that's the major point for that. me and the other planner have been keeping track and seeing if the 1.5 works for the applications that we received, and so far it does. I've used it in other jurisdictions, and it seems to work well.
So the picture that we're looking at there with that building, the 1.5 metric, they would be in compliance with this?
Yes. Most of them. I can't speak for signs that were done prior to when I got here, but maybe some larger signs. But they typically all seem to be consistent. And I know most of the signs in that plaza met the 1.5 times the bay width.
Okay.
Carlos, did you have a question? Look like you did.
I'm just looking at it visually, and I think, looking at the one that says, I can't read what it says, Layout Top Tampa Hookah Lounge.
Yeah.
That one seems to be probably more than 1.5, seems to almost go.
That one might be
Width
a
of the
little
entire
bit
thing.
larger. It's because maybe the red is expanding probably a little too much than the other signs. But in general, the 1.5 did work well in the last 6 months or so that we've seen building permits. They seem to all fit that 1.5.
And I read the backup material on this, and it seems to be a good solution because, as you pointed out in the backup material, people exceed, there's 20% for the whole building, and then by the time you rent out the place that's vacant, you don't have any of the 20% left, and your sign's this big.
Yeah, it's basically first come, first serve, and if you
Right.
don't meet it, then you're out of luck.
Right,
So
right.
that's an
So
issue.
This is a much better way to do it, as it would seem, so.
Okay, and moving on to the language, there was language in there that described differences between 1 and 2 stories, and then 3 stories and higher. What we did was we took out the different requirements between the two. The other section had 1.7 times the linear feet for 3 stories or more, but we wanted to make it consistent. It's easier to permit that way, easier for the contractors and easier for staff. So we are proposing all around the 1.5 times the tenant width. And if you are a single tenant building, you would take your building frontage width times 1.5.
That could be, so if you're CVS, you could have a sign as wide as your whole building?
It would be 1.5 times the, so let's just say they're a 50-foot wide building, you would take 1.5, that's 75 square feet,
The area-
which is,
The width of the area, so the area of the sign would be based off of the bay width, correct, or not the bay width, but
Well,
the
if it's a single,
building frontage.
building frontage?
The width of the frontage, so it would be the square footage. You would have 75 square feet, not 75 length.
does that metric continue to work out well for large buildings?
Yes, it does.
It does? I'm just picturing like a Publix and this,
Yeah, I can show an example coming up here.
okay.
But that was the main portion that we wanted to get through. It just was causing too many permitting issues. Another consideration and inconsistency that we had was for ground signs, monument signs, if you're on a corner lot, I hope this doesn't bring up too much heartburn, but if you're on a corner lot, you can have one ground sign per frontage. And so I wanted to make that consistent in saying that if you're on a corner lot as well, you can have one wall sign per building frontage. And the way I worded that was, it just says per building frontage. So that's just to make it consistent. And then lastly, is in the strike through, it says that if you're in a plaza or if you're bound by the signage code, you have to have uniformity in content, type, and color. Well, in a different section that you're also bound by, it says wall, flat, and facade signs located in a shopping center are not required to be uniform in color and type. So it was just inconsistent. I did remove the portion that said that you have to be uniform. It's up to the council on that, but I think that when you're having different plazas and different tenant owners, they want a different type of look. The only exception would be at the time someone is applying for a PD, then you can create a condition or the developer can propose where the signs are uniform in nature. Go ahead.
Mr. Mayor, may I?
Oh, yes.
So if we can just stop right there for a second, because that's a pretty big issue in many communities. So I just want to make sure council is completely on board with what you're saying is you're going to remove right now there's inconsistency.
It's
Right,
inconsistent.
but you're definitely, with this edit, we're removing the notion of uniformity. So if there is a shopping center, in some communities, you go to a shopping center and every single tenant sign is the same bullet, the same style, for example, the same color, this whole shopping center matches. That's not the case here in Temple Terrace largely, so as far as I can tell. Are we okay with that? If we're okay the way it is, that's the direction we're going.
I have a question. So can the building owner make requirements on their own about what the signs of different tenants have to be? It's just we're not enforcing it, but the owner can?
The owner could, but I doubt they would, because they want to get the tenants in, so the tenants are going to come with their own corporate sign package, or if they're individual small business owners, something they like. And so usually the owners they just, sure, that's fine, they don't really care on their end.
Well, I'm thinking about like a plaza like Publix. They're very uniform and how everything there has to portray itself because they have an aesthetic. And it seems like whatever we do is not going to overarch whatever they want to do in that area. But places like the picture you showed, I mean, they don't want to have those regulations, so we're not going to say anything about it. They can stick to their guns about that.
Vice Mayor?
Yeah, comment on that. So it would be, in that scenario, since the building owner wouldn't control it, then the first tenant controls the signs for everybody else renting after that. If we make it uniform, I mean, who would control the first sign? And then after that, every other tenant would have to have that same type of sign. So
Somebody has to be first.
somebody has to be first. So I don't know. I understand what you're saying, and I like uniformity too, but I don't know how that's controlled.
It's definitely more complicated to do it uniform. And it's not just complicated, but there's a lot of pushback, particularly when you're dealing with national brands. And you get into these inevitable long discussions back and forth, trying to get them to change their sign to match your community standard or whatever that plaza standard is. And sometimes it works great, and a lot of times it looks
And
awful.
we have Stellar sign standards, so there's certain types of signs we can have.
Right, but I'm in favor of this. This is the world we live in, right? Whether we like it or not. I mean, I'd love it if everything were the same color and the same font, but that's not real. And if we want to be open for business and attract businesses here, we're going to have to bend to the reality that these companies put a fortune into the design of their logo and their marketing. And some of them simply will not change the color or the font to comply with us when they can go 2 miles down the road to Hillsborough County or Tampa. They just won't come here. And so I think we just have to understand the reality of the way the world is, and that's it. But we still regulate the size and the number of signs. It's not a free-for-all. We don't have the Vegas Strip here. But there are some companies, to your point, that just are not going to change. We sunk $1 million into this logo. This is a nationally known logo, and we're not going to make it green for you. That's my
Can we
opinion.
re-summarize where we are right this second on that? Because I'm hearing two different things. We already talked about the front of the buildings, okay? We're trying to force uniformity on that now?
No.
No, that's what I understood. We weren't.
The opposite.
Okay. Now we're talking about a building that fronts on the side also, like a CVS, for example, standalone. Is that what we're talking about now?
We left that.
Yeah, we moved on for that. It's per building frontage, so if you're on a corner lot, you can have a wall sign on both sides, yes.
Okay, all right.
And then as far as the inconsistency, one portion said that you had to have consistent signs, and the other side said that they don't have to be uniform, so I was just trying to clean up that language, and I removed the portion that said you have to be uniform. Okay. You guys heard an application not too long ago about a tattoo. I think that plaza had all consistent signs. I don't know if that was a PD or if that was the owner enforcing that, but that plaza had all uniform signage. So it can happen, there's a few like that.
Do we have a definition of what frontage is? Does it make it clear that it means that it's facing a street?
In the language, not frontage per se in the definition, but it does say 1.5 times the building frontage linear feet along a roadway. So
Okay, as long as it's mentioning the street.
along a roadway, yeah.
They wanted a sign on a third side because they were facing the parking lot
Yep.
and wanted the people from the parking lot to be able to see it, and we said, no, they were on the corner, you just get the two on the street, so.
And that is my last slide, actually. It's talking about the difference. So to wrap things up, my last slide is considering whether we want it per building frontage or if we want the signage allowance to be shared on all facades. So for instance, you have the Boston Market, they have a sign on 56 and a sign on Fowler, and so we can either keep it like that for the corner lots, or we can have it when you're in like a shopping plaza or some type of situation where the owner wants visibility on all sides. We can still have them be bound by the 1.5, but the difference is, right, either frontage or the signage allowance to be shared on all sides. So if a building's 50 foot wide, 1.5 times that, they'll have a 75 square foot allowance. We can either require it just on the frontage, or they can split that 75 feet along different signage. So it just depends. In this instance, maybe Boston Market would have wanted it on the other side because maybe, I think there's a drainage easement, but sometimes you want that signage on there because there's a drive or some other situation where they want to be visible.
Seems to me like the frontage on the roads is sufficient to me, but
But this talks about the scenario you gave with denying the parking lot side. So if we,
This was in the CRA.
okay, so if we change it, then you could have the third sign or the fourth sign,
As long as you meet your maximum.
as long as you meet your maximum. Okay, I'm just trying to see what we're trying to do here.
Councilmember Abel.
I want to make sure I understand. So let's say they have a 50-foot frontage, and then they're allowed 75 feet for the signs. And you're saying there's really two alternatives here. One is 75 divided by 2, right, on each frontage?
Yeah.
Or-
Frontage, right.
Or 75 on each frontage?
No, to be split along all sides. So let's just say each signage for the Boston Market's 20 feet, 20 feet. Well, now you have a remainder of, no, I can't do math, 35 feet for potentially the other side that you're not seeing, so.
In this particular case, could they do all four?
I haven't gotten the measurements for them, but,
Well, I'm assuming the number.
yeah, let's just say if they have allowance, then yes, they'll be allowed to have it on all four sides. And like I said, I've seen it where you have these master developments and you have drives or some type of access that pedestrians or drivers vehicles have to go through, that you want your signage on that side, and it's just not facing a frontage along a roadway.
Can you go back to what you're proposing about this, the language for that, please?
Right now, I did leave it as per building frontage.
Just point me in the right direction. Is it the maximum square footage or underneath that?
It's, I believe, right above. So the first part that's highlighted in green.
Single tenant building size.
One sign per building frontage attached to the
Yes.
building facade only.
Okay, thanks.
Other than Boston Market, are there other businesses in the city that have expressed that this has been, that our current situation is a burden or a problem?
Besides the one that Pam mentioned, I'm not sure of any at this time. It goes back to, well, if they did want to, they would probably consider a variance, but it goes back to the issue of a variance is that you have to have a hardship, and that's hard to do with signage.
Well, I mean, I'm thinking of the ones that, you know, the CVS in the corner and there's a Publix parking lot behind it and Applebee's, I guess, and those kind of things, but I just don't, I gotta, I don't know, I think would need a little more urging to be in favor of changing it just based on, I mean, I think if we're gonna relax a code, we ought to have a reason to do that, and I haven't really heard anybody come that's compelling, that's had a compelling argument to change it. Go ahead.
A question on that. The property down in Fountain Shops, like the Rocking Crab, how does this code affect them? I mean, they've got a sign on 56th Street, but they also have a sign on the parking lot side. Is that frontage?
It is, that's Bertha Palmer.
So a road, parking lot, and building is frontage. I guess it would be even in CVS, there's parking there. Yeah, okay, sorry about that.
No problem.
But that's a good example, thank you, because that's both sides of the frontage, they've got signage. CVS, that Bush and both sides of they just don't have it in the back.
Right. And then the other, I mean, there is some argument, if you're coming in from the Burger King side to the Boston Market, you come in from Publix across the street to Burger King and you're driving there, you don't know what that building is.
Conceivably.
Conceivably.
So I was thinking about the Applebee's example that was mentioned, I think, by Councilmember Schizler. So if you're, because Applebee's is not on the corner, so you're driving down Fowler. In this scenario right now, the building sign, there might be a monument sign there too, I'm not sure, but the building sign would only be on the frontage side, it'd only be on the side facing Fowler, correct?
Right.
So the other three sides, so if you're driving, because I've dealt with these developers a lot of times, they'll say, well, if I'm driving, they may not see me, my buildings, they're gonna see this wall, but they're not gonna see that it's Applebee's until they're right on top of me, and then they're gonna go past me. Or if I'm in the parking lot, they're not gonna, to the point here, they're not gonna see that it's my store or anything like that. I guess that's just the concern. They will ask. I mean, that is inevitably what will come up when they do retail development. They want as much signage as possible. Doesn't mean we have to give it to them, but that will be a pressure that they will put on the community.
I don't know.
And when you're dealing with the downtown area, we require rezonings to go to PD, so it will come back to you. And if you're trying to amend a PD, it will come back to you. So you can also condition it in the PD conditions as well. So it's not too much of a concern actually in the CRA, but it's more of what you want the standard to be. They can ask for waivers and such in the PD conditions.
Well, this is a decisive group.
Well, the whole thing's as clear as mud. That's.
Do you want us, would it be helpful if we went out and maybe in our own community and other communities and took some pictures, maybe do like a photo gallery to bring back to the council of sort of examples of this, where these standalone buildings and
Yeah,
plazas?
it would, and I gotta tell you, and this is no reflection on you guys. I appreciate what you're doing here, because we need to be up on current standards, community standards, so thank you for doing this, and I know that this is not easy, and you come up here and you present it, and then we just pick every little, I get it. Here's what I'm feeling, though, with this question, and that is, there's a voice missing here, and that's the voice of the business community itself. It's not up to you to go out and recruit people to come in and tell us, what they think. But I'm left struggling with, okay, how many buildings is this affecting, and is there a need here? Is there a legitimate business need that because we want to be business friendly. On the other hand, we want to protect against, an unattractive city where it's just like a Vegas Strip and everywhere you turn, there's a sign and, it's just clutter, visual clutter. We want to be a beautiful city too. So there's a balance here. I don't have a good feeling, and I don't know about my colleagues, but I'm sitting here not knowing what to do because I'm like, we want to be business friendly, but is this really an impediment to business, or are we just going to clutter up the city some more so that Burger King can have 4 signs or whatever? I mean, and it's a shame that there's nobody here to say, hey, I really need this because of X, or I'm just feel like we're, and I know we all take what we're doing here very seriously. We're writing rules that are law for businesses in the city. We take this responsibility very, very seriously, and we want to get it right. But I'm struggling with what is getting it right in this. I don't know.
What is the next step? What's your next step in this process? What are you envisioning?
To do some revisions for this and bring it back to you with.
The reason I asked that question is, just sitting here listening to your description of what we're saying, my mind is it covers this building, but what about that building? And now we're talking down by the Walgreens. Now the Walgreens has potentially 3 signs down on, the CVS has. I think you guys are working on this. You're going to come back, and it gives us an opportunity as we travel through the city. Well, how does that impact that? Because that's what I'm doing with it right now. I like it, but it's like, well, who does it affect? And I'm off on another tangent looking as to, okay, well, it'll do this, it'll do that, it'll make it for the, and Rock and Crab, I hadn't even thought about that. You got them on both sides now. So the 56th Street side and the Bertha Palmer side. So I think that this is a natural progression. You guys got more work to do on these. We got some thinking to do as to what we're doing, and then we can talk to the business community ourselves. We know enough people in the area that are involved in it. What's the impact? Is it good? Is it bad? Is this sufficient for you? And then we can all get back together with the feedback and after you've fixed your language questions and so forth, and because we're not going to come back and vote on it next time. It's still got to go through probably a couple more iterations before it's presentable.
Councilmember Abel.
I like what city manager said about having some visuals from around the community that we could look at and kind of see what it means for them. And that will help me decide on this, because it's kind of abstract for me right now.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
So I wanted to say one thing about signage. What started this signage was, I don't know, 6 or 7 months ago, I started driving around looking at our signs and comparing it to code. And the one thing that stuck out in my mind is the setting general commercial, when you have a freestanding building, you have one wall sign. Well, I saw in the CRA there's like 8 businesses with more than one wall sign. And I started going around looking at other businesses, and I'm like, how did these get permitted? In fact, there's some businesses, one business in the downtown that has 3 wall signs on all 3 sides of the building, which is not allowed by code either. So the impetus was to try it first to fix wall signs. I felt like at intersections, it would be very appropriate to allow 2 signs for our businesses, so they would have visibility on both streets. And then it just kind of morphed from there. We started looking at in shopping centers, what this running total actually would mean. And as the mayor said, the last one, somebody could use all the allowances for the sign, and then at the end there. So this has been sort of an ongoing thing as we got into it more and more. More issues have arisen. So yeah, we're looking forward to bringing this back to you with the comments you've given us and see if we can improve on that as well. I've got a number of pictures of signs in the city. We can maybe do a little field trip in our city and nearby and take some more pictures and have some visual supports when we come back again.
Okay. All right. And we're not trying to make this even more difficult for you. We appreciate you bringing it up, but we do take this very seriously. We want to be fair to our businesses and to our residents when it comes to fences, and that we want to be reasonable. We don't want to have regulations that we don't need to have. So, okay.
Absolutely. We definitely appreciate your feedback. My last slide, I don't know if you still have that up, okay. My last slide was to amend the section in the CRA to be consistent with the proposal I brought to you about the 1.5 times the bay width or the building frontage. And that concludes my PowerPoint.
Any, excuse me, any objections to that? That seems like a reasonable, it seems like a really good,
Consistency.
good,
Yeah.
okay,
Thank you very much.
thank you.
She's running away from the podium.
Mr. Sherman took the easy ones, right? Those guys.
Well, rank has its privileges.
Yeah.
Well, that was by design.
Mr. Bia?
So I think we have good direction. We will regroup. How much time? I guess we should talk about that, understanding when we're going to come back.
In all honesty, I would like the first of the year, maybe, because we got the holidays coming up. We're pretty busy in our department. I want to give it good due diligence, so when we do bring it back to you, it's close to what you guys want. So we could do it in December, we could do it in, whatever y'all say, we'll have it ready.
Do you want to bring back anything else at that point? I'm just thinking the follow-up section right now, and then bring back anything, because we talked about doing other things that we still want to get to as well.
We could have first drafts of 3 or 4 different sections to talk about, like, here's what we heard at the last meeting today. This is what we think fits it. And then these are 2 or 3 more sections.
Comments about that. We did send this out to the Development Review Committee, and we gave them a month to provide any comments or concerns. Just make sure that everything that we're proposing is consistent with other departments and they have no objections with that. And the second thing is we definitely need to get moving on the Live Local Act. That was legislation that was just passed, so we'll probably prioritize that as well. That would probably be the amendment that we come back with.
The which? I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
Live local.
Live Local
Live
Act.
local, okay.
That has to do with affordable housing.
So I have one thing I'd like to, and I know that there's only so much bandwidth, I get that, and I know you have a lot of irons in the fire, but there's an area that I am a little concerned about, and that is the area of microbreweries. And come up, Mike, Mr. And so I mentioned this, but I learned something recently I didn't know, and this is kind of why I'm a little uncomfortable with our position right now. I did not know that microbreweries up until recently were not permitted in Hillsborough County in unincorporated Hillsborough County under the land use regulations until I met a fellow who opened a craft beer brewery in unincorporated Hillsborough County, and he was telling me everything he had to go through, and it took him over a year to get, they had to do a comp plan amendment, they had to do, and he stuck with it because he had a piece of property that he was committed to doing this on. Otherwise, he wouldn't have done it. He told me, he said, that's why all the craft beer places in Hillsborough County are in the city of Tampa, because the city of Tampa figured out how to do this, and with their regulations, that's why all craft beer stuff is in Tampa. You know, never had any in unincorporated Hillsborough County. You had some in Pasco, but they were all in Tampa. And he says now you can have a craft beer brewery in unincorporated Hillsborough County because of me, thank you very much, because I went through the whole process to get a land comp plan amendment that enabled this to be done. And he's telling me, unless you have done that in your city, you couldn't have a craft beer place if you could get one. Which for years I've been trying to attract one here, only to find out that they couldn't do it anyway. Even if I could get one to come here, they couldn't do it. We're in an even worse position now because Hillsborough County has changed their land use regulations to permit it. So even if we could get one to agree to come here now, we're the only city, well, I don't know about Plant City, but You can go to Tampa, you can do it, you can go to unincorporated Hillsborough County, you can do it, but you can't do it under our current regulations. You can brew beer, or you can serve beer, but you can't do both. And that, I am concerned about that. Now, I guess it's moot because we've been unsuccessful in getting anybody to come here, but we're never gonna get anybody to come here if we don't tackle that. And so I know there's, like I said, I know there's only so much bandwidth going on here, but I hope we don't kick this one too far down the road.
We can bring that back the next round with y'all. One, I've already started, I spoke with the gentleman that the mayor's talking to, and he told me of his issues that he had with Hillsborough County, and then I researched how Hillsborough County did it. If I remember correctly now, I believe it's a conditional use, which a permit, conditional use in the commercial general or general commercial category. So I've got sections, I've got the Hillsborough Code, and I've done some research in other local governments. That one wouldn't be a big push to get a draft one to y'all at the next meeting, whenever that may be. But just give us time for me to regroup on that one, do a little more research. The guy who I spoke with said he would be glad to take a look at it and give me his thoughts too. I can't remember the gentleman's name, I have it written down. But I would shoot it to him and get his comments as well, if that's okay with y'all.
This came up because I
Yeah.
was trying to get him to put his second establishment here, and he goes, "You don't know your own rules." And I said, "What are you talking about?" And that's how this came up, because he just opened one, and I said, "Well, you need a satellite one in Temple Terrace," and he goes, "Great, change your law."
We could do a department field trip for lunch to visit them.
That works.
Yeah.
Maybe after hours, we'll go check it.
Yeah, it's complicated because under state law, you can't have a craft beer place if you don't sell it. You can't brew on site. You can brew on site in one thing, under one set of regulations, but then you can't sell it. And then if you sell it, you can't consume it. And if you consume it, then you can't, it's just so the model is under, so it's difficult.
I think it's based, a lot of it, on the amount of beer you brew. These certain thresholds, you're a brewery. Other thresholds, you're a craft brewery. Other thresholds, you're a microbrewery.
Right.
So-
And then there's the issue of food, which is food trucks in this case, and that opens up another thing with food trucks and outdoor dining. It's just, there's, so,
But yes, sir, I'll bring that back to the next one we talk about.
okay. Council members, anything?
All I gotta say is I'm very impressed with what you guys.
Yeah.
What you've
Yeah.
done in the short period of time that you've had to work with.
Yep.
It's good stuff.
Thank you. I will tell you, Malik and Miranda are awesome to work with, and we're very fortunate to have them on our team.
Thank
Yeah, yeah, so we do appreciate you bringing this stuff up, and it's not easy. I know it's not easy and frustrating for you, I'm sure, but thank you for doing this.
And being patient with us and making sure
Absolutely.
we understand it.
Look, y'all are a great council to work with. Many councils, when I leave, I'm constantly licking my wounds, and I don't have that here, and I really appreciate that. I do.
So, Mr. Bia, anything else? City Attorney, anything? Directors, anything while you have us? Members of the public, anything?
I emailed everyone.
Oh, okay,
Got it.
okay. Very good. Well, thank you for all your work, and we are 2 minutes early. Look at that. We'll be adjourned.